How are we all? Where'd the poll go? It's blanked out on my YouTube app thanks to a glitch. Oh, that's weird. The poll's up, so it might be on your end. If you're using a phone, it might be a mobile issue. That's frustrating. How are we all? Yeah, exactly. Hegel, famous German philosopher. Don't tell me you haven't heard of Hegel. Hegel. His phenomenologue of Sprite. How your synthesizer is trans. Yeah, that's a patron request, actually. So we've got a couple things we're going over. We'll wait a couple minutes for people to shuffle in before we begin. Well, there we go. That's Windows being weird. Okay. So we have a King Crocoduck thread to go over. I recommended Rashid Khalidi's 100 Years War on Palestine. He's doing a write-up on it. But he's done a Twitter thread on it as well. Don't know if he mentions the title by name. I don't think he does. But we're going to go over that and sort of try and respond to it. I'm nowhere near an expert on the matter. But it'll be an interesting exercise anyways. What is a crocoduck? Is that similar to the duck nana? Vastly inferior. Much less evolved species. See, the duck nana is intelligently designed. The crocoduck is not. So we're going over that. We have a patron request. I won't say who. But we're doing a couple of videos by a channel called... Let me see if I got this right. Red means recording. Who has two videos we're going to be looking at. First is Spitfire Audio has a transphobia problem. And then your synthesizer's trans and other stories. And that's talking about issues of not just issues of transphobia, but also the amount of trans contributions to music and things of that sort. And apparently it's quite interesting. So we're going to spend about an hour on that. Hour or so. And then finally, our war on the post-liberals begins. We enter into our new arc. Expect skirmishes with the likes of eudaimonia. Friendly, but still with an aim to kill. You're close to distraught. I don't get all this oppression of support for Palestine at all. Well, when you read about it, one thing you'll learn is that this is not new. Disturbingly, it's actually as good as it's ever been in 50 years. There was a time when there was only support for Israel. There was no critical presence at all in North America. Not meaningfully. It was so tired. It was so small and tired, I guess. Does this mean a new state of play? We'll do a new state of play soon. It's changed so radically. Not in a bad way. A couple of things have happened. One is we've broken a lot of bridges that I'm not annoyed by. Two is we've simultaneously become more self-sustaining. So we aren't really in a situation where we need the same kinds of connections that we did at one point in order to kind of function. We're operating at a good level right now. We're operating at a good level where we can kind of focus on what we want to do. Really wasn't that long ago. It was an eventful short while. It wasn't long ago, but a lot has happened. And the entire field has changed, so we'll do it sometime. We'll do it some night. That'd be a good member stream, actually. That'd be a good member stream. We'll see. I probably want that to be open anyways, because people get a kick out of it. People get a kick out of it, and other people get really angry about it for some reason, even though it's an obvious joke. Semi-serious joke. The post-fascists in Italy are bad news. No hope for post-anything, really. Post-liberals are a little different. Little different. Not different enough, but different. Can we keep occasional Wick content for memes? Sometimes you'll host panels we want to cover. That's a thing that will happen from time to time. Probably not on Palestine. I decided that after he boldly declared last stream he did on the Palestine issue, I think the one in response to my comments on aristocracy, that the ground invasion had already begun. It was last week. Ground invasion hasn't started, friends. We are not there yet. But he just looks dead into the camera. So the ground invasion has begun, gang. This whole thing has been a great effort, and Mr. Perez, you've grown both literally and figuratively. Hey, I'm watching my diet. That's not very nice. I'm also sticking to tea for a little while. I've had an upset stomach, and the last thing you want on that is alcohol. Actually, let's find... I wanna see that again. Hang on. That was a funny moment. Apparently he's doing call-ins on Palestine right now. Okay, so let's see. If I go into Wick TV. Was it the left has... It was the left has an anti-Semitism problem, that's it. That's the one. Okay. Let's check this out. Did it show up on my screen? There we go, okay.
People who are pro-Israel, you are going to, just, again, by dint of who you surround yourself with, hear a lot more of the, but it's there anyway. The wanting to hurt, the wanting to kill, to destroy, to tear down.
Listen to this. Oh God.
That's all that's on my mind right now. I can't think of anything else. It is what I want to talk about. It is what I want to address, because this is an ongoing situation. About an hour ago, the ground invasion started, right? I believe about an hour ago, right?
Oh, God. Never change, Wick. Never change. I need to have that Curb Your Enthusiasm music in my soundbox. Peter Singer will be back, don't worry. Besides, I don't know why you guys are like getting all excited about the theory meter. You have to fill the meter first, otherwise nothing happens anyways. That meter is not filling. Just one more time. I can't. I'm sorry.
Ongoing situation. About an hour ago, the ground invasion started. Right.
This is from the 13th. It's 13 days ago. Just ugh. All right. We're not getting any younger. Let's dive into this. We'll move you over here. And do I have I've got a Twitter page, right? I've got a Twitter capture thing. Sure I do. Sure I do. I guess I could just use screen capture. I'll use the PDF one. There we go. Okay. I think I need to reorganize my OBS. I'm not liking the current configuration. I thought it would be faster. It seems to be kind of clunky. Tonight's call-ins had some cringe. Maybe we'll watch those afterwards. In absolute fairness, I thought the ground invasion would be almost immediate, like the week of the 8th. I mean, I did too, but that's a far cry from saying it's already happened when it hasn't, right? Like, it's a weird thing to just kind of say. Where do you get that from? All right. So, King Crocoduck. This is on my recommendation that he ordered this book. He says he finished reading it. He's read it astonishingly fast. Let me see. So if I look at our correspondence, he bought the book on the 22nd. Posted this. Sorry, he bought the book on the 21st. He posted this on the 22nd. So he read this, which, not counting endnotes, is 259 pages in a day. That's impressive. I'll say that much. I myself haven't read the whole thing. I've read about half. Which, with notes, amounts to about 130 pages. How many pages does it have total? Like, excluding, like, notes and index, it's 259. 255. 255. Yep, on the dot. And the notes go on till about... And they're detailed notes. They've got exposition. So I mean, with notes, you're looking at about 300 pages. So it's accessible. This is not a dense book. It's very easy to follow. It's very lucid. It's also very well cited. You can get through it pretty quickly, but 300 pages. That's a lot. That is a lot for one day. He's going to basically, yeah. He would have had to. So I mean, case in point, like he's missed something right off the bat with this meme. So I'll read it out for you. So the Jews bought all of their land legitimately until 48? Yes. And then they got the mandate to start a state from the local sovereign? Correct. It wasn't until you tried to kill them that they kicked you out? That's correct. What Khalidi goes to great pains to argue at to highlight at the beginning of the book, first chapter, introduction, in fact, is that when we talk about the legitimate buying of the land, we're not talking about, okay, the Palestinians had property, they sold it, and then went, Wade was just a prank bro and tried to take it back and then started killing a bunch of Israelis. What actually happened was the land was tilled in essentially a communal fashion, essentially by usufruct. The Ottoman Empire introduced land reforms. The land reforms allowed people to register their plots of land, with caveats, including things like it makes you vulnerable to conscription in war. Palestinian, what we would call Palestinian Arab elites, bought up, registered the land, and then sold it as packages of property to Zionist buyers from abroad, from under the feet of the people who had lived on and tilled it for generations. Zionists come over, kick off all of the people from the land, leave them destitute. These were not the people who sold the land, they get nothing, and replace them with Jewish workers. And so when we're talking about the buying of the land legitimately, quote unquote, we actually just mean legally. By legitimacy, we certainly do not mean something alternative to raw force. That is precisely what was used. But there was an element of class involved, wherein the lower classes were thrown under the bus, sold out, as it were, by the upper classes in advance of there being a Palestinian Arab identity. And so when you talk about, and they got a mandate to start a state from the local sovereign, what is meant by the local sovereign here? Well, that's a little bit tricky. What he actually means is the British occupying the territory of Palestine. They gave a mandate in the Balfour Declaration to the Zionists to begin a state, without any recognition of the local Arabs at all. The local Arabs, who, by the way, were promised autonomy if they abetted the British in fighting off the Ottomans, which they did. And so you essentially have a betrayal by Britain of its allies in a war, and the erecting of a state, of a sovereign base in land that was promised to them, that would have power and authority over them that would not be reflected on their end. They did want to partition Palestine into Arab and Zionist, like statelets, I suppose, but also not really. They were hedging their bets on the Jewish state, and the Arab one was more or less undermined. And so when this bottom square says it wasn't until you tried to kill them that they kicked you out, strike that and reverse it. They tried to kick them out, sometimes killed them to do so, and then after doing this for decades and decades and decades, you had a degeneration of the government of the Palestinian Arabs. You had a breaking of faith in their traditional leadership, which did not suffer the immediate consequences of the oppression as much as the lower classes did, and engaged in futile diplomacy for upwards of 10 years. And you eventually had even their military leadership killed in the 48 War, during which entire cities were purged of Arabs, bombarded. I think... what is the... what was the population of... Here, I'll read an excerpt from this, actually. Like a slow, seemingly endless train wreck, the Nakba unfolded over a period of many months. Its first stage, from November 30th, 1947, until the final withdrawal of British forces and the establishment of Israel on May 15th, 1948, witnessed successive defeats by Zionist paramilitary groups, including the Haganah and the Irgun, of the poorly armed and organized Palestinians and the Arab volunteers who had come to help them. This first stage saw a bitterly fought campaign that culminated in a countrywide Zionist offensive dubbed Plan Dalet in the spring of 1948. Plan Dalet involved the conquest and depopulation in April and the first half of May of the two largest Arab urban centers, Jaffa and Haifa, and of the Arab neighborhoods of West Jerusalem, as well as of scores of Arab cities, towns, and villages, including Tiberias on April 18th, Haifa on April 23rd, Safad on May 10th, and Beisan, I think I'm pronouncing that right, Beisan, Beisan, if anybody wants to correct me, on May 11th. Thus, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine began well before the State of Israel was proclaimed on May 15th, 1948. Jaffa was besieged and ceaselessly bombarded with mortars and harassed by snipers. Once finally overrun by Zionist forces during the first weeks of May, it was systematically emptied of most of its 60,000 Arab residents. Hang on, give it a sec. Lost the connection.
What are you, a fucking liberal?
Okay, looks like we're back. God damn. Alright, I'll read the last sentence again. Once finally overrun by Zionist forces during the first weeks of May, it was systematically emptied of most of its 60,000 Arab residents. I'm talking about Jaffa. Although Jaffa was meant to be part of the stillborn Arab state designated by the 1947 partition plan, no international actor attempted to stop this major violation of the UN resolution. Subjected to similar bombardments and attacks on poorly defended civilian neighborhoods, the 60,000 Palestinian inhabitants of Haifa, the 30,000 living in West Jerusalem, the 12,000 in Safad, 6,000 in Beisan, and 5,500 in Tiberias suffered the same fate. Most of Palestine's Arab urban population thus became refugees and lost their homes and livelihoods. Yeah. So that's the peaceful takeover of Israel. Yeah, we're back. So let's go through this. So he says here, just finished reading a famous Palestinian scholar's book about the history of the conflict. There's a lot to say about it, but this meme is essentially correct. This meme is substantially mistaken. The local sovereign was actually the international community, but whatever. The international community, the League of Nations is not the international community. The League of Nations is an alliance. It's not an international. It's not the international community. But pressing on. Okay, before anyone busts my balls about this, one, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, no one staked a national claim to have a state. That's untrue. Once again, a premise of Arab complicity in fighting the Ottomans was that they would have autonomy in the region. The British mandate was created to oversee the division of the land into a Jewish state and an Arab state. This is true, but once again, they already had made promises to make an Arab state, and the Jewish state was being planted against the will of the locals, involving the vicious buying up of land from under their feet, and sometimes not the buying of land, sometimes literally just the moving in of military forces, both British and Zionist, and sometimes illegal, to simply force them out of their homes at gunpoint, sometimes just killing them. 2. The British mandate was indeed a colonial power, but it would be wrong to argue, as many Palestinians, including this scholar, do, that they were essentially Zionist collaborators. They were explicitly Zionist collaborators. Like they said that this is the nature of what they were doing. They were establishing a Jewish state in collusion with Zionist leaders. This isn't even controversial. This is just a basic fact of the matter. This is a bizarre thing to say. They actually did a lot of shit that hurt both the Arabs and the Jews in the region, and both responded by forming terrorist orgs. Yes and no. They did a lot of shit that hurt the Arabs, certainly, and insofar as a consequence of this, they created a cultural vacuum, or a structural vacuum, if you will, amongst the Arab populations that resulted, or an agitation amongst the Arabs that resulted in violent action on the part of Arab movements and forces and so on and so forth against Israeli settlers, as well as, well, I guess not Israeli settlers because there's not a state yet, but against Jewish settlers and against British personnel. But the reason why Jewish terrorist groups, I should more specifically say Zionist terrorist groups, started attacking the British in Israel was because they put a curb on immigration in response to an Arab revolt, which was itself in response to violent land privations. So this is a little bit misleading. It's the British were not a neutral party here. The British were tired of managing that whole thing. And so in response to this, they said, okay, fine, we'll throw up a white paper, we'll limit the amount of immigration. And then a Zionist terrorist group bombed a bunch of officials in a hotel, killed a lot of innocent people. Which, by the way, Palestinian terrorists would continue to do for a long time as well. There's, just to be clear here, while the Palestinian people are victims in this, almost categorically, this doesn't make Palestinian actors good guys. There are some, but typically when we're talking about, people like that, and this is actually, well, this will come up later, one of the things that I really like about Rashid Khalidi's approach to this is that he's not really a partisan. He is obviously, you can tell by the title, the 100 Years' War in Palestine. He's particularly sympathetic to the Palestinians as a group of people who are embattled. But one of the things that he's very careful to critique is that often reckless pro-Palestinian militancy on behalf of organizations like Fatah eventually was one of the conditions that made it possible for things like the preemptive strike against Egypt that Israel carried out in the 6 Day War. He is not a rah-rah Hamas person. The major part of the early part of the book is specifically explaining how did the nature of Palestinian advocacy get to the state that it's in now. So, okay, and both responded by forming terrorist orgs until the British basically said, fuck it, we're out, figure it out yourselves. Essentially true. 3. The UN General Assembly came up with a partition plan that would have given the majority of the land to the Arabs if you include Transjordan, but the Arabs still rejected it. So here's an additional problem. Okay. If you include Transjordan, is carrying a lot of weight there. Transjordan is held with, later on, Jordan, and the King of Jordan, was held in substantial contempt by Palestinian Arabs because it itself colluded with the British in order to collect more land from the land of Palestine. And so giving away a large chunk of land to Transjordan, while it may technically be Arab land, is still nonetheless to keep the Palestinian Arabs under the heel of British colonial rule. This is why, later on, the the king of Jordan was assassinated by someone connected to is it the Mufti? The major figure living in. Let me see if I can't actually get the name. God, I can't remember the bloody name. It's the Mufti, right? Here. Assassination. Here, let me just find it here. Yeah, the ex-Mufti of Jerusalem, King Abdullah. He was assassinated at the entrance to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Old City of Jerusalem, and he was assassinated by someone connected to the ex-Mufti, who unfortunately was living in Nazi Germany at the time. This was not a good look at the time. It still remains so. So when you actually look at the amount of land that would have been given to the Palestinian Arabs, in fact, it amounts to actually less than half. 56% of the land would have been given to. Actually, I don't even think that's true, even with Transjordan. Wait, hang on. If you include Transjordan. No, the partition plan doesn't include Transjordan. That's mistaken. The 1947 partition plan doesn't include. What am I talking about? Transjordan is already its own territory. The partition plan gives 50. I'm thinking of the earlier plan. The partition plan gives 56% of the territory to the Jewish state. So the Arab state gets less than half in its own region, in its own. Yeah, so the Jewish minority would get 56%. It's not more than half. That's incorrect. The whole thing I just said didn't even matter. That's incorrect. No, it is not essential to understanding how Palestinians see Jews to know that the ex-Mufti was living in Nazi Germany. That's actually kind of irrelevant. For one, why is the ex-Mufti not living in Israel in the first place? Because the brute forced out. He was out of favor too by that point, among the Palestinians, incidentally. He was part of the old notable system that had fallen out of favor because it had become ineffectual, and because the basis of their authority, which is their actual positions in government, was gone. They were in exile. They were brute forced out. So mayors, governors, etc., all these people who had local prestige, they don't have it anymore for very long once they're kicked out of their positions of authority. So despite the fact they would have gotten, just continuing with this, despite the fact they would have gotten a nation state in the region for the first time in history as opposed to being imperial subjects, the Arabs had not yet conceived of themselves as a Palestinian nation with a collective right to self-determination as Palestinians. This is a strange decision, and I'll explain why. Palestinian nationhood, this author's actually written a whole book about this as well. Palestinian nationhood is a response to the targeting and removal of the Arab population within the Palestinian region. That takes place long in advance of the actual establishment of an independent Jewish state in the region of Palestine. I would have to review to find out when they started self-referring as Palestinians, but there was absolutely a coherent group that recognized its interests being targeted. by colonial powers. So it is incorrect to say that there was no self-conception of a national identity with a collective right to self-determination. That was a premise, once again, of collusion with the British against the Ottomans. And that was the basis of advocacy towards the League of Nations and to the UN and to the British when their homes and their cities and their even essential aspects of the geography were being appropriated without their input and without any recognition of even their existence. Israel declared independence in 1948, inviting peaceful neighborliness to its Arab neighbors and preparing to abide by the partition plan approved by the UN General Assembly. The Arab world dissented from the international community and proceeded to do what they've always done. The Arab world proceeded to do what they've always done, which was to call for the genocide of the Jews in the region. This is an odd decision for a couple of reasons. Among other things, because if you, for example, read the history of the Jews in Europe, it's actually typically the case that Muslim rulers were considerably more generous and tolerant of religious and cultural diversity within their regions than Europeans were until very, very recently. When you read about things like the Spanish Inquisition, one of their principal targets were Jews. Moreover, there's a fundamental flaw in the thinking here. Declaring independence as a state in a region, especially when doing so is at the tail end of a massive violent process of ethnic cleansing involving sniper shot and mortars, in which cities are emptied and people sent out into the wilderness as refugees. Pouring into the neighboring countries, by the way. That is not inviting peaceful neighborliness. Quite the opposite. That is the announcement of a warring neighbor. That's what that was. States themselves are defined by their capacity for violence. That's what ultimately distinguishes a state from a non-state actor as we conceive of them. We even call states that fail to maintain a monopoly of legitimate physical violence failed states. Failed states are filled with mobs and gangs that are capable of doing extraordinary violence and do extraordinary violence. Somalia isn't lacking for weapons. Somalia as an entity cannot leverage, as a state, the kind of directed and coherent power that something like the United States or like even places like Belgium or whatever can do. The establishment of an independent state in a region where it has been actively warring on the local population, and it has been by this point, in fact within that year, sending in refugees to the neighboring places while it's being armed by a colonial power, that is the opposite of a declaration of peace. To say that the Arab world always called for the genocide of the Jews in the region is absurd. Jews lived amongst Palestinian Arabs in the region long in advance of this. Obviously long in advance of this. Not all Jews are in Israel because of Zionism. Arab nations invaded the new Jewish state, which for the most part was left to fend for itself. Thing is, these Jews had just undergone a Holocaust, and they had literally no place else to go. That's a more complicated question. It's not entirely true. Moreover, there's a bit of a catch-22 here. You have to be really careful with this. One of the reasons why there was an intense desire for an increase of immigration of Jews into the Zionist territory, by the Zionist movement, into Israel, is that it would have the manpower to establish itself and defend itself, and so on and so forth. And of course, by establishing, we do mean the pushing out of the local population. On paper, before these efforts actually took place, usually involved conveying them peacefully to other regions to be employed gainfully. In practice, it ended up being pushing them out of their homes to barrel the gun. But there was a numerical requirement in order to have the manpower to successfully run the thing amidst hostile parties it was depriving. It is a hell of a thing to attempt to use the Holocaust to justify a Holocaust, which is what's been going on by this point in Israel's history. Israel has been clearing out cities. Zionists, I should say, because Israel has not yet been established. Zionist forces have been clearing out cities, entire cities, hundreds of thousands of people, making hundreds of thousands of people refugees. Bombarding them, shelling them, shooting them with snipers. Essentially laying siege to the entire region. This is even before there is an Israeli state to claim has a right to exist. This is a strictly colonial act of the most violent sort. Maybe it is indeed the case that they had nowhere else to go but Israel. Which is unfortunate, because that does absolutely nothing to absolve what Israel had done and what Zionist movements had done to get it there in the first place. If that is indeed true, and it's not actually clear to me that it is, but if that is indeed true, that there's literally nowhere else for them to go, except, supposedly, into the line of fire of a bunch of genocidal Arab states that just demonically hate Jews. They're just frothing at the mouth. They just can't help themselves. They're just crazy that way. That's a tragedy at that stage. That's an unfortunate consequence of movements bigger than any individual colliding with each other, and putting people into a very rough spot. In which case, you would go, all right, so the Jewish settlers to Israel in this period did nothing wrong, which I think is fair. But that does not absolve the state of Israel, which is in Israel. The state of Israel was not established in response to the Holocaust. The state of Israel was being developed since before World War I. That absolves it of absolutely nothing. Because the Zionist state is not the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are not the Zionist state. They are not the state of Israel. And Jews who criticize the state of Israel are often brutalized in the media and physically sometimes. This is such bad history, it totally neglects the Arab violence against Jews. You've categorically neglected the Zionist violence against Arabs. You just completely left it out. You're not being honest, King Crocoduck, I'm sorry. And you're not being honest on multiple counts, because this is covered in the beginning of this book. You've accounted for none of it. He goes into extensive detail. He provides extensive citations. Look, these are all the citations for the first chapter. Look at this. This is a lot. There's like, you have so many resources here detailing this, and this isn't even arguing that the state of Israel as such should disappear. It's literally just saying, hey, look, there's been an ongoing process of genocide against the Arabs in this region by a colonial imposed state. And that's not even like a controversial part of this text. He's using like mainstream documentation. The stereotype is born out of polling data and violence. It's funny, the Zionist violence was always on self-defense. That's actually just a lie. They weren't bombarding cities and clearing them of their people and creating hundreds of thousands of refugees in self-defense. Are you insane, sir? But as it happens, you bring up polling data. Khalidi provides some. According to a 2018 poll by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, for every single year since 2011, over 84% of those polled in 11 Arab countries opposed recognition of Israel, with the main reason given for this opposition being its occupation of Palestinian lands. From 2017 to 2018, 87% were against recognition, with only 8% in favor. 3/4 of respondents in that year considered Palestine an Arab cause, while 82% considered Israel the main foreign threat to the region. Negative attitudes toward U.S. policy have gone from 49% in 2014 to 79% from 2017 to 2018. This is from the Arab Opinion Index. The reason why there is widespread hostility in the region to the state of Israel is because from its inception, it has been a genocidal, warring entity in the region. It did not establish itself peacefully. It did not respect its agreements with the locals. It did not respect the sovereignty of its neighbors. And it even preemptively attacked its neighbors. There's just absolutely no basis whatsoever for Khalidi is wrong. What do you mean he's wrong? This is known. Look, I can show you it. Look, let's go to Wikipedia, okay? History of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And by the way, what you will find here is a ton of references to Palestinians blowing up and shooting Israelis. This is not a biased source in favor of Palestinians. So let's see. So there should be a timeline here. Oh, hang on. Here we go. Okay. Timeline of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Okay. So when we go to 1947, Arab-Israeli War. Okay. Here, I'll make myself smaller so you can see this. May 13th, Haganah took control of Jaffa. Its 1947 population of 70,000 reduced to 4,000. What's the source for this? Fall of a City, Journal of Israeli History. That sounds good. May 14th. Jewish People's Council approves a proclamation declaring the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the State of Israel. British mandate over Palestine terminated. October 28th, Israeli army killed at least 70 villagers at Al-Dawayima. Population of 70,000 reduced to 4,000. And then following that, that's when you get Palestinian terror. That's when it starts. This is when it switches from, because this is how it progresses, and this is an impoverished account. Zionist forces decimate local population, and then it's criminal violence afterwards. And by this point, like, and this is like fairly one-sided because it leaves out a lot. Although not everything. So it's got, for example, the Kafr Qasim massacre. Like that's not a no one's doing you dirty here, Croc. Like that's literally the history. And he provides sources for it. Let's see what they are. Let's see, okay? What have we got here? So when I go and I look at the bombing of these cities. So Plan Dalit. Plan Dalit was a Zionist military plan executed in the civil war phase of the 1948 Palestine War for the conquest of territory in mandatory Palestine in preparation for the establishment of a Jewish state. The plan was requested by Jewish agency leader David Ben-Gurion and developed by the Haganah and finalized March 10, 1948. Details. The plan, Section 3, under Consolidation of Defense Systems and Fortifications, calls for the occupation of police stations, the control of government installations, and the protection of secondary transportation arteries. Part 4 under this heading includes the following controversial paragraphs. Mounting operations against enemy population centers located inside or near a defensive system in order to prevent them from being used as bases by an active armed force. So this is an offensive move. This is an offensive move that is being done to establish a defensive parameter in future to protect the thing that is attacking the local population. That is not a defensive measure. That's an attack with the land to be held afterwards taken into account. Operations. Carve out a corridor connecting Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Divide the main part of the UN-proposed Arab state in two. Continuation of Nakshon, focused on Arab villages near Latrun. Capture Haifa and defeat its Arab population. Look at this language. Operation Bir Hametz. Capture Haifa and defeat its Arab population. Destroy ring of Arab villages surrounding Jerusalem. Control the roads from Jerusalem north to Ramallah, east to Jericho, and south to Bethlehem. Destroy Arab villages surrounding Jaffa. Remove Arabs and consolidate control of all of eastern Galilee. Destroy Arab villages. Destroy Arab villages. Drive out Arab forces. Destroy Arab villages. Occupy Acre. Remove Arabs. Clear out Arab forces. Occupy Arab residential quarters. Like, this is genocide. I don't know what you'd have to be smoking to think that's defensive. But I want some. It's probably much too strong for me, actually. I've got sensitive lungs. Appropriately, they expelled the genocidal inhabitants outside of what subsequently became known as the 1967 borders, which the UN Security Council ratified upon recognizing the State of Israel. Repeat this basic pattern of the story over and over again for the next 8 decades. That is not true. That was not a pattern that was repeated. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Moreover, from this point moving forward, you have a vast escalation, for example, of Palestinian on Israeli violence. The nature of the ways in which the State of Israel obtains land changes. You don't have the same overt conquest language being put into formal documents. You have recently certainly seen a lot of rhetoric on Twitter and so on and so forth that eerily sounds similar to it. But I think, Croc, brother, one day is not enough. This is 300 pages long. Give it an actual read. I want to see what you do with the actual material. If there is competing documentation that throws this very well-cited and very measured account into question, I want to see it. And I would take it very seriously. But this cannot be the quality of the write-up, because this fundamentally just ignores basic facts of the matter. So I look forward to seeing the write-up, but this is not it. I hope that's not what I have to look forward to. All right. Now that's out of the way. Somebody said the Wick Collins were funny. We'll take a look at those for a couple minutes.
Why?
Oh, it's got a new channel trailer. Interesting.
Well, give me 1 minute. You know, maybe I forgot how to stream since I was gone. Gang, hi.
Hi.
Been a minute.
Where is it? Come on. You're gonna show up on my screen or what? What's going on here? Oh wait, there we go. Okay. Forgot to do the thing. Also, chat. Do you want theory or what? We got a hungry squid here. What is this? Gotta pay rent, you know.
What's everyone
We've got an editor to pay now too. This is getting expensive.
doing today?
If you appreciate what I do, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. There's also a theory squid. The theory squid is the better way to go. Actually, not the better way to go. You should do both. There are perks on the Patreon. The Patreon gets you mugs. The mugs have octopi on them. At higher tiers, it also gets you video requests. I'm working on one right now. It's very late. This one's on Rawls' Theory of Justice. Sorry, mine was blank from all of the murder we've been covering. But if the theory squid, if we hit $100 in super chats, whatever is winning in the theory options for today, we move immediately to that, and we cover an hour of theory at least. And it is good. This is what keeps the theory content coming. But I digress. We have horrible, horrible things to listen to first.
You're doing well.
To incentivize you.
It's, well, we got a lot to talk about. Simultaneously, a lot has happened since we last talked, and not much has happened since we last talked. I believe our last stream that we did together was over a week ago now. Wednesday, I think. We had a wonderful discussion with Sockdon Left back.
He's bald now. He's copying me.
Getting more about religion and its place.
Oh, I have to talk with Sockdon Left about religion soon, actually.
Conflict.
Hey, where are the Collins? Come on.
Either.
Oh my god.
See these videos, and,
Okay,
and they're almost like there seems
real example.
All right.
everyone
Oh, come on. When does it start?
Islamophobia going on, and that is also equally unacceptable. Like, we can't start just because someone is a Muslim or even a Palestinian, equate them with Hamas, and to do so is gross and disgusting.
Oh, thank you, Naomi. I appreciate that.
You are just
And thanks for the $2 as well.
to this culture of hate, and it just cannot stand. There are plenty of Palestinians who have expressed horror to me personally and publicly about what happened on October 7th.
If I subscribe to your Patreon, I expect high-quality pics of your library. I will give you high-quality pictures of my library. That I can accomplish. That I can do for you. Thank you, Nerodia, for the $2.
Again, they usually are anti-Israel, but they haven't been anti-Semitic about it, right? It's almost, I won't say almost all, but a lot of the anti-Semitism is coming from white leftists at home, in their keyboard warriors, or vacay protesters. And what I mean by vacay protesters is they treat protest as a day out. It's
Sir, with all due respect, Wick, I'm not gonna belittle anybody for soliciting money on the internet. God, no. But, my dude, you got $3,000 in a GoFundMe to fix your tooth a year ago. You've gone to TwitchCon. You've gotten Baldur's Gate 3. You've gotten... Maybe don't throw stones in glass houses about people not using the resources available to them in the most effective way. That being said, I don't know what he means by anti-Semites here, because I have a deep suspicion he's going to call any critique of the state of Israel as an institution. Which, by the way, if you're an anarchist, methodological or otherwise, you're going to be critical of the state of Israel as an institution, even if it had done nothing wrong, because it's a state. And states are inherently warlike and oppressive and so on and so forth, and not necessary, except as necessitated by each other. You'll just be critiquing it alongside every other state adjoining it as well, and it will have nothing to do with the particular people manning it. There are certainly anti-Semites and anti-Semites on the left, but to say that the vast majority of critics of Israel, or to imply that the vast majority of critics of Israel are anti-Semitic, is preposterous. Thank you, Win, for the $25. Very much appreciated. So that brings us actually up to... Where are we at? We are at 30. Damn, we're getting there.
It's an outing. And also college.
And the problem. Thank you for the $7.88. That brings us up to 38.
And college professors. There's a lot coming from that venue as well. I did a whole stream on this, though.
Yeah, the whole stream in which you said that the ground invasion was starting, because you, Wick, are on top of things.
With just a smidge, an inkling, a trickle of examples. But yeah. Okay, let's bring on the next caller. Allison, hello.
Hello.
You got a camera for us today?
I do.
Oh, we get the couch view? What?
Oh, yeah.
Here, can you turn yourself up just a smidge?
How do I do that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know if he thinks that, like, all of the white nationalists and anti-Semites on the right just disappear as soon as Israel starts committing mass killings. Has it occurred to him, I wonder, that a lot of these anti-Jewish sentiments might be coming from that end of things, that are disingenuously inserting themselves into an anti-colonial narrative? Because they do that. They'll pretend to be like, oh, we just care so much about the plight of the Palestinians, and really it is just a vehicle for legitimizing their hatred of Jews. Which is a thing you can do, because it's possible for the Zionist state to merit actual criticism, and to be a deadly and immoral entity in its region, and to have a deeply unethical history. And for someone to criticize that correctly, and then use that as a vehicle to attack the people occupying it. Which is a different thing entirely, right? Like, we saw this with people like Keith Woods and with like Nick Fuentes and whatnot, and they'll pretend to be like, oh, they care so much about the autonomy of the local Arab population, but they really don't. It's just, oh boy, it's now kosher to attack a lot of Jewish officials and a lot of people attached to them, and that is not a left-wing approach. Thank you, Gavin W., for the 1999. We also need another political theory recommendations book list. You need to give Destiny some book recommendations on Israel-Palestine, because he is just reading Wikipedia now. I still like Destiny, though. Well, shame on you. But thank you very much for the $20. Well, I mean, Wikipedia is not that bad, actually, on Israel-Palestine, all things considered. You will find enough in there to recognize that Israel is not the good guy in the space. The Jewish population is not the bad guy either, and you have to be really careful about threading that needle. Because just because the Zionist state is an ethno-state, is attempting to assert ethnic supremacy in the region, does not mean that the members of that ethnicity are responsible for it. That includes, by the way, even the ones that support it, at least intellectually. If you're like legitimately, of course, like being a part of the government apparatus or whatever, and you're like enthusiastically like driving forward the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, then yeah, you are responsible. But like the people who live there, like the parents, the workers, people who just want to live at this point, people who are the product of generations of people living there, regardless of how they initially got there, you can't target them. They're not responsible for this. The state entity is, but one of the reasons why you critique the state as an entity is precisely because it's not representative of its population. It's an organization that uses them and sits atop them, and it is fundamentally democratic in terms of the source of its power, but it's not democratic in terms of its function. It doesn't promote democracy. So where are we at now? So we are at 50. We have jumped to 50. We're halfway there, friends.
I can just come closer to the microphone.
Yeah,
maybe?
that, yes.
Okay. Wow. I feel so close to my camera.
I agree. He does need to read some actual scholarship. You could do worse than this. This is an easy read for someone who does not read very much. Not that I have first-hand knowledge of what it's like to be someone who doesn't read very much, but I'm making an assumption based upon how relatively easy this is to read compared to what I usually read. Now take that with a grain of salt, because what I'm also reading alongside this is Hegel. So, yeah. Rashid Khalidi, 100 Years War on Palestine. Very good book. Go for that one. He's also got some other books on the origins of the Palestinian identity. There is a big one by, it begins with a T. Let me find it quickly. Hang on. So if I go to books, I go to Israel. It is not saved because I didn't save it because I'm an idiot. Okay, never mind. I'll find it later. But if you're in the server, I will post a link.
Oh, wow.
It's all good. Oh, what you got for us today?
Okay, I have 3 wholly unrelated
Thank you, Lisa.
topics. You've obviously got a line, so like I don't particularly expect any one of them to take very long, but like obviously we don't have to get through them all. But the first one, and like the most related to the Israel-Palestine, is the phenomenon of so-called doxing trucks. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Are these the trucks that went through like Harvard and Princeton, and they had the names and pictures of everyone who signed those weird ass support Hamas letters?
Yes. So for the audience, it's billboard trucks. So it's these like trucks with light up like sides that project messages, right? And these trucks have been driving around at least Harvard, Columbia, and UPenn with like the like blown up headshots of people who have been like board members of these organizations, and like first and last names, no addresses, okay, but first and last names and headshots with messages like Harvard's leading anti-Semite. And they just drive around the streets surrounding these campuses because I don't know that they're allowed on campuses.
Yeah, that's insanity. These are grown adults who are psychotically trying to incite violence against students. That's insanity.
But people are calling it doxing trucks, and then people are saying this is histrionic. Addresses are not revealed. These are people who publicly associated with
Is she
an
defending
organization
this?
that made a
Tell me
public
she's not
statement,
defending this.
and they're responsible for the public blowback. And I just think it's an interesting conversation one way or the other. And then there are also like right-wingers who are having like major schadenfreude because they're like, listen, these Ivy League lefties, these like elite university lefties are the people who have been pushing like cancel culture is actually just accountability culture. Like pro-free speech is a dog whistle for pro-hate speech. Like these are the fucking people probably who have been pushing this stuff. So like they can eat it, which I don't necessarily think that's right. I think it's better to probably have a principled stance.
Yeah, I'll just interject here. That kind of, and I've seen this not just from the right.
Good.
Not
She's not defending it. She's not defending it. That's
right?
good.
I've seen people being like, "Well, this
She
is
seems
what they
nice.
get,"
I would have been
right? All the
disappointed.
people being fired for their pro-Palestinian views, all the people being fired for or losing job opportunities because of their stances on social media. is gross to me, right? Like, I think that's, again, we have to stand against censorship. Just if I may, we have to stand against censorship. We have to stand against this kind of crushing of freedom of expression by the corporate world wherever it rears its ugly head. And these Harvard Docks trucks, let's talk about those a minute, right? These things are not good. This is very, very bad.
Good.
So how
Good,
these
Wick.
letters worked is
Good for you,
a
Wick.
lot of these groups, okay, put out like this combined letter. Most of the people in those groups did not actually read or know what was in the letter, right? They didn't. Their names was associated with it because they were part of the group, but they weren't the ones that put out the letter. In a lot of cases, they were very, very surprised.
Here, let's actually see this letter. Let's see what this is. Okay, where's the... Someone find me the letter. Send it to me in Discord. I'm looking for it too. Students face retaliation for Israel's statement. Do we have a link to the statement? Come on, guys. This is like a basic source for this. No? No, you're not going to show us the actual statement? Okay, hang on. God, I hate journalists who don't provide sources for things. Where is it? Hang on, I gotta find this. This is driving me up a wall. Harvard letter, Hamas, Palestine. Where is the letter? Oh my God. Oh, here we go. This doesn't have the letter on it though. This is just the article I was looking at before. Okay. Alright, okay, this does actually, I maybe spoke too soon. Okay, so look at this. So, oh, we'll use the big one. The statement was initially released on the PSC's Instagram page, but was later temporarily suspended by Meta, according to the group. The account was back online as of Monday evening. Today's events did not occur in a vacuum, the statement reads. For the last 2 decades, millions of Palestinians in Gaza have been forced to live in an open-air prison. Israeli officials promised to open the gates of hell, and the massacres in Gaza have already commenced. In the coming days, Palestinians will be forced to bear the full brunt of Israel's violence. The apartheid regime is the only one to blame, it continues. This is so far all correct. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I see what's happening. Okay, so when it says this, the apartheid regime is the only one to blame, that's being taken to absolve the Hamas people who are responsible for the killings. But the apartheid regime is what makes Hamas even possible. Hamas is unpopular. Hamas only has a basis for its existence, and people have argued that this is why the attack was conducted, in order to maintain its existence despite its waning popularity, because of the apartheid conditions of the State of Israel. If Palestinians were treated as people and they didn't have their homes and land appropriated from them, if they were able to live like human beings, because Gaza is an open-air prison, Hamas would have no basis to exist. And every single person who engaged in those killings should be rounded up and shot, but that doesn't we're now looking at 6,000 dead. What's the current death toll? Death toll, Gaza, they're still bombing it. They haven't even done the ground invasion yet. $6,747. That's from Palestinian officials. Let's half it, okay? Let's be hyper skeptical. Let's pretend their numbers are 50% off, which is sanguine. That's over 3,000 deaths. You got to make a choice. You're either against mass killings or not. Like you can't just be okay with it, provided it's a state body that's conducting them. Oh, looks like Mbembe is winning. Oh, thank you, Iggle Higgle, for the $10 for the theory gods. Yay, brother. That puts us at 60. Yeah, this letter, I can't see the rest of it. I only see the part that they published. But this is not an anti-Semitic letter. And this every other part of it has been borne out to be 100% true. Massacres in Gaza already commenced. If their numbers are off by 50%, that's still a massacre of over 3,000. That's an immense number of people killed by bombing in a few days in a civilian center. If the number is correct... And not only that, but we've actually seen, we were going over what Israeli think tanks are proposing, given the current situation in Gaza. There is, not just on Twitter rhetoric, there is full intention by people with deep connections to the Israeli government, people in the Israeli government, to use this as an opportunity to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And indeed, they have actually said, the Israeli government has explicitly told Gazans to simply evacuate entire directionalities of the Gaza space. Maps of Meaning Must Win You made me watch Wick. What is wrong with you, Brooks? But thank you for the $10. But seriously. Thought the letter was offensive. Yeah, the letter was offensive if you're a frothing at the mouth. What do you call an Arabophobe or whatever? If you're somebody who despises the Palestinian population and wants them wiped off the map. Like, the worst I can see here is that this is recklessly written. There is not a statement here Like, the apartheid regime is the only one to blame. The apartheid regime is the ambience in which Hamas functions. This does not mean that Hamas is blameless. But Hamas as an entity is symptomatic. It's like if you if you look at a desolate, I mean, you look at an impoverished region, and it's flooded with violent crime, and those violent criminals, they kill people. They do mass murder. Maybe they kill as many people as the Hamas terrorists did on a monthly basis, and they do it over and over and over again. There's no purpose in blaming them because they don't care. They're bad guys. They're not our allies or our friends. They are an organization that is trying to secure its own interests, even if that goes against the interests of the Palestinian people. The Israeli state, by contrast, supposedly has an ethic and has standards and stands for its people. That's the basis of its justification for existing there, is that it represents the population over which it rules. That is something you should hold accountable. That's something you have to hold accountable. To say that, well, we should only expect as much of the Israeli state as of the most violent criminals in the territory is insanity. How long has it been since AO? And then he promised Bataille. We did Bataille! You were there! We'll do more AO soon. Alright. Let's keep going with this. Yeah, so the trucks are juvenile, and they're dangerous, and they're ridiculous. That's just ridiculous.
When they saw what the letter's contents entailed. So to just go around putting them on blast for something they didn't actually do is, again, reprehensible.
Good.
It's gross.
Oh, good. They didn't actually do it. Fantastic.
Okay.
Excellent.
I think that it's absolutely
Based Wick. Good for Wick.
A violation.
Good for Wick.
To do that.
He's found his spine.
Anecdotal example, but I was looking at the Twitter earlier of somebody who claims to be a Harvard law student in the Muslim Law Students Association, or some title like that, and she was a board member, and she claims that she was broadcast on a doxing truck, and she was like, listen, like, we got an email saying that this statement was coming out and that we had signed on to it, and we could choose to disassociate from the organization if we wanted to. But the idea that we all had creative input in this, like, it's just not reflective of reality. But then there are people who are like, well, you're still in the group.
Yeah, can I be honest? Like, I don't think that's a great defense if the content actually was bad. I think if you sign a thing, you do author it, unless there's some kind of coercion involved, or, of course, like, if they didn't sign it, and they're just kind of presumed because of their association with an organization that they authored it therefore. I think if you sign a thing, you author it, and then it's up to you afterwards to disassociate yourself from it positively. If you don't, if you were misled, or if you disavow its contents after the fact. Maybe not if you're misled about its contents, because then you've been misled and you're a victim, but you know what I mean. Alright, I'm getting bored of this.
Like, you saw that, like,
and it's your... So... presented it. Is this a genocide according to the UN definition? Then that...
Oh no.
I looked into...
My
oh
favorite
no.
kind of side.
Oh no.
Sleeve Tea Rocks offer you any cocaine.
Oh no.
Give me cocaine. I am cocaine free game. I did not do cocaine, I promise.
He did cocaine. Look at him. Look how white his beard is. He's got that whole streak there. He's been guzzling cocaine like out of a dog bowl. Thank you, Gold, for the $10. I put a picture of the full letter in stream notes. It's not loading on your browser for some reason. Oh, thank you. Okay. That's useful, actually. Full letter stream notes. Okay, so let's... All right. And thank you for the $10. Okay, so this is the full letter. It's not that long. Okay. Joint statement by Harvard Palestine solidarity groups on the situation in Palestine. We, the undersigned student organizations, hold the Israeli regime entirely responsible for all the unfolding violence. Okay. So this language is important. This is not saying that the Israeli regime is personally responsible for the murders conducted by members of Hamas. This is saying that the unfolding violence as a complete totality, that is as a consequence of the Israeli regime's, the Israeli state, I take that to mean, the Israeli state's actions historically. And I think that's a fair assessment of the case. Today's events did not occur in a vacuum. For the last 2 decades, millions of Palestinians... What is this on? This is on October 10th. Is that the date that this was published? Because it's saying... When does it say it was written? Because 10/7 didn't take place on the 10th. Today's events did not occur in a vacuum. For the last 2 decades, millions of Palestinians in Gaza have been forced to live in an OPEB-era prison. Come on, guys. Israeli officials promised to open the gates of hell, and the massacres in Gaza have already commenced. Palestinians in Gaza have no shelters for refuge and nowhere to escape. In the coming days, Palestinians will be forced to bear the full brunt of Israel's violence. The apartheid regime is the only one to blame. Israeli violence has structured every aspect of Palestinian existence for 75 years. This is true. From systematized land seizures to routine airstrikes, arbitrary detentions... It's needed an edit to military checkpoints. This is not long. You could have gotten an editor. And enforced family separations to targeted killings. Palestinians have been forced to live in a state of death, both slow and sudden. Today, the Palestinian ordeal enters into uncharted territory. The coming days will require a firm stand against colonial retaliation. We call on the Harvard community to take action to stop the ongoing annihilation of Palestinians. This is entirely fair. This is entirely fair. On October 10th, the unfolding violence. That is future tense. That is talking about violence that is unfolding presently. At this point, we are talking about the active bombardment of Gaza by the Israeli state. The Hamas attack is not an attack by Palestinians. Palestinian civilians were not handed, like this letter was passed around. They were not handed, hey guys, here's our plan to slaughter a bunch of Israelis as some kind of symbolic vengeance. They were not given an opportunity to sign on to this. This was just done. But it is they who are being bombed right now. And the only reason why an organization like Hamas even exists is because of and not even of necessity. The reason why it's able to take hold, the reason why a criminal organization like that is able to assert itself over the population, is because of precisely what's described here. So this is accurate. I'm just reading. Harvard Jews for Liberation, famously anti-Semitic group. That's what I was looking for. Because I knew there was going to be something like that in here. Because, once again, Israel, the state of Israel, is not the Hebrew people of the Old Testament, and it's not Jews. It's a state. It's a discrete organization that sustains itself by arms, that exists in a discrete... that was placed there by colonial authority. By colonial power. And there are a lot of Jews who are very much opposed to this. Some very famous ones, in fact. There's a really good book, highly recommend, by one such. You've heard of her before. Judith Butler, Parting Ways, Jewishness and the Critique of Zionism. Highly recommend. Not exactly accessible, very Foucaultian, but Alright, anyways.
But thank you for asking. Let's bring in the next person.
Donating because Imran deserves nice things. Thank you, Barbarian, for the $10. Appreciate that. Well, we're almost there. We're not quite there on the meter. We're
Whoa.
close, though. We're close. Let me find out exactly where we're at. Hang on. Let me look at the numbers here. Oh, damn. We're at 90 on the dot.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. How are you, Wick? It's been a while.
It has been a while. What's up?
Oh, yes. This one.
Yeah. So, I just wanted to come in here to talk about one subject and one subject only. How familiar are you on the subject of genocide?
Oh man, genocide. That's my favorite kind of side. I'm familiar
East
enough.
side, west
Also,
side,
thank you
north
Z
side,
somewhere
south
for the
side.
13-month resub. Gang, get your
Thank you, Lily Tenshus, for the 788. We're so close. So close. Just about there.
subs in, get your bits in, get your super chats in. I'll ask them. Okay, go ahead, Food Chops. What you got? Genocide.
Yeah,
We're
so
talking genocide.
I've been going.
Wait, what the hell? It just updated. Hang on. No, we're there. We are there. We're there. Oh, thank God, Mbembe won. Oh, frabjous day, Kalukale. Alright, friends. The theory bar has been filled. And it is theory time. It is theory time for 1 hour, and then afterwards, we have a patron request to fulfill. And I think what this means is that we are going to postpone the post-liberal wars till tomorrow, because this is going to take us another 2 hours. So this will be tonight. Hang on, let me get this set up. I'll have to refill my tea for this as well. So this one actually is a video lecture. I'm actually really relieved about this one. I don't need to read a giant text. We will probably have to find text that I will then have to read in the middle of it, because he will mention things that I will not understand, that I will want to see. But we're listening to the lovely tones of Achille Mbembe tonight on the new global mobility regime. Otita Sunday drink, all of it. All of it. Except for well, what's that? What's it called? Hang on. There's a specific kind that I really don't like. Oh, Rebus tea. I hate Rooibos tea. Hate it so much. It Wait, is it Rooibos tea or am I thinking of something else? Hang on, I'm thinking of something else here. Rosehip tea, that's what I'm thinking of. Rosehip tea. I hate rosehip tea. Rosehip tea is absolutely vile. It's like, it tastes like blood. I really don't like it. Okay, I'll be right back. get the show on the road. We'll wait just a minute for people to come back in because we spent a long time waiting. My apologies. The kettle had to boil from empty, and I need it because my throat is just going. But we will endure. Oh, by the way, before I begin, funny thing from last night. My brain was just not functioning, and I just could not process the train in Selenitic Age on Mist. And I realized just after I closed it, wait a minute, the sounds combine. Oh no, the combined sounds stand for northwest, southwest, southeast, northeast. And they are telling you which direction to go. And I just spent like an hour just trying to brute force it. And it's just like, So we'll make short work of it next time. See Discord DMs? What's going on? Whoa. Okay, quick diversion. This is from 2 hours ago. This doesn't have a lot of views. Is this confirmed? Fox News reporting the U.S. military carried out airstrikes on Iranian proxy forces in Syria moments ago in response to recent attacks on U.S. bases. Hang on. I'm not seeing a whole lot about active bombing of Iranian targets. What? Resistance forces targeted U.S. occupation base in Iraq. Iraq's foreign minister says that if the genocide in Gaza continues, the U.S. will not be spared from this fire. I don't know if that's translated correctly, but I hope not. Thousands of U.S. soldiers landed in Israel. Meanwhile, Turkey, China, Russia, Iran mobilizing troops to the Middle East, potentially a proxy war similar to Ukraine. Okay. Keep me up to date, please, Titan, if you could. Iran announces large-scale military training exercises starting tomorrow. Okay. Yeah, well, we'll have to keep an eye on that, don't we? Interesting times. Yeah, I'm not trusting this either, Brooks. It's like, okay. But it's a statement, right? Okay. Anyways, we're leaving death and gloom in the Middle East for death and gloom in South Africa. Or I guess not in South Africa presently. This is more of a global analysis. So, Achille Mbembe, I guess it's literally in South Africa. Achille Mbembe is giving a lecture. The Tanner lecture is very prestigious. Borders in the Age of Networks. This is a very interesting topic. For one, because it depends on what he means by networks. I'm assuming it's going to mean things like the internet, but like even more broadly, the nature of state sovereignty is it's sort of a simple in the sense that the totality of the defining attribute of sovereignty, namely its monopoly on legitimate physical violence, means that when you represent it on a map, it cannot actually definitionally coincide at all with another of its kind. They're because you cancel each other out at that point. You can't have two monopolies of the same thing. Which the lie is put to when you consider that economic relationships which exert tremendous force, in fact, and tremendous violence even, transgress those boundaries all the time. And not just willingly, as in like the necessity of trade and things like that. Also through criminal organizations, through like changes in the natural environment. Our shared ecosystem breaks down the notion of borders in that way, in which purely economic activity that has no international dimension to it, happening over here, can cause catastrophic changes over here. So on and so forth. So this is Achille Mbembe, Borders in the Age of Networks. Let's get into it. The new global mobility regime. So this is his lecture. So the series, I take it, is Borders in the Age of Networks. And the title of the lecture is The New Global Mobility Regime. Side note for the name, the M is silent. Oh, Mbembe. So Achille Mbembe. God, I've been calling him Mbembe forever, so that's embarrassing. Mbembe is Cameroonian, and that's how pronunciation follows. You mean the first M, right? He's not called Bebby. Mbembe. That's easier to say, so I'm grateful. All right, Achille Mbembe. My apologies. The New Global Mobility Regime. You can tell I've only read the name.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this year's Tanner Lectures at Yale University, hosted by the Whitney Humanities Center. I'm Gary Tomlinson. I'm the director of the Whitney. We're gathered, of course, to hear from Achille Mbembe, who is a researcher.
He said Mbembe, not Bembe. Are you going to defy a research professor? No, that's Bembe's a research professor. Are you going to defy a man with those glasses? I'm pretty sure this guy was caught by Columbo multiple times, and he still stands.
Professor at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, and more specifically at the Wits Institute for Social and Economic Research.
Also, the CH of Achille is pronounced K? It's French, isn't it? It's Achille, not Achille. Are you okay, well, I guess we'll hear him pronounce that one wrong, too, I guess.
As it is known. And we're delighted, by the way, to have the director of WISER, Professor Sarah Nuttall, with us also today. Sarah?
God, that took some coaxing. Poor Sarah Nuttall.
I've known Professor Mbembe since we were colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania some 20...
And yet he still says Mbembe.
5 years ago, and it's a huge pleasure for me to welcome him to this stage today. I know we are in for today, tomorrow, and Thursday not only an intellectual feast, but something more, since Professor Mbembe has, in his many writings, it's not too much to say, recast the terms of post-colonial analysis and critique.
Professors pronounce names wrong a lot, but not the names of people they work with for years and years and years, unless Mbembe is just really, really kind about it, or cruel, as it were.
This achievement is particularly marked in his most recent book, But One, Critique of Black Reason, where he leads us to understand blackness not only as a project of the imagination shaped by half a millennium of subjugation, enslavement, exploitation, murder, but also as the condition that all the world's subaltern people are subjected to today by the forces of neoliberal capital. But I leave further introduction of Professor Mbembe to my colleague, Michael Denning. To me, it's left to outline the schedule of Tanner events over the next 2 days and to say a few words about the Tanners as an institution. This afternoon, we hear the first of Professor Mbembe's 2 lectures. Afterwards, you're all invited to a reception here at the Whitney. It's straight down the hall directly behind you. Tomorrow, again at 5 o'clock, Professor Mbembe will present his second lecture, and after that, there will be a short question and answer session. And then on Thursday morning, finally, at 10:30, we reconvene for a discussion among Professor Mbembe, Professor Denning, and another Yale professor, Inderpal Gruel. At that session, there will be additional opportunity for questions from the audience. As to the Tanner Lectures on Human Values, they were established by the American scholar, industrialist, and philanthropist Obert Clark Tanner and his wife, Grace Tanner. For many years, a professor at the University of Utah and a scholar of the New Testament educated at Harvard and Stanford, Tanner also founded in 1927, early in his adulthood, a jewelry company in Salt Lake City. The company later expanded into broad areas of human resource consulting and employee recognition programs. They made trophies and placards and so on for 25 years of service and things like that, and from that made a whole lot of money. And it is on the base of that corporation that the Tanner Foundation and Obert and Grace Tanner's philanthropic efforts are built. These efforts include today the Tanner Lectures at Yale and at a number of other universities in the United States, Great Britain, and beyond. The purpose Obert Tanner envisaged for the...
Hang on, we gotta settle this.
We are looking at how to pronounce these names, as well as how to say more interesting but often confusing names, including from French, so make sure to stay tuned to the channel. So this is French for Achilles, as in the character from Greek mythology. This is said in French as Achille.
Yes! Yes!
Achille.
I win!
The Tanner Lectures is to advance and reflect upon scholarly and scientific learning relating to human values. In creating the lectureships, Professor Tanner knowingly left his purview very broad. He wrote, "I see these lectures simply as a search for a better understanding of human behavior and human values. This understanding may be pursued for its own intrinsic worth, but it may also eventually have practical consequences for the quality of personal and social life," unquote. Appointment as a Tanner Lecturer is a recognition of uncommon achievement and outstanding abilities in the area of human values and studies, and we are honored to add Professor Mbembe to the list of distinguished scholars and humanists whom Yale has so recognized. At Yale, the Tanner Lectures are selected by the president in consultation with the director and executive committee of the Whitney Humanities.
No, you weren't right. It was Achille. It was Achille. I was right.
Center, so we're also indebted to Yale President Peter Salovey, who will be here tomorrow night, for his assistance in bringing today's speaker to us. Now it's my pleasure to welcome to the podium Michael Denning, William R. Keenan Jr., Professor of American Studies and English.
Hang on. We have confirmation. U.S. strikes 2 facilities linked to Iranian-backed militias in Syria, following a series of attacks on U.S. forces in the Middle East. Earlier Thursday, the U.S. announced it was deploying 900 troops to the Middle East, with the potential for many more. The U.S. has also moved 2 carrier strike groups to the eastern Mediterranean Sea, and an amphibian-ready group closer to Israel in the waters of the Middle East. We can strike pulling out the troops away from Biden's accomplishments. All right.
To introduce our speaker, Michael.
No, I knew it was Achille because in Ender's Shadow, the sort of sidequel novel for Ender's Game, there's a villain called Achille. And I had to look it up how to pronounce it, because like, his name's Achille, what? It's Achille.
Thank you, Gary. It's a great pleasure to welcome Achille and Mbembe back to Yale to deliver
We've gone from Mbembe to Mbembe.
the Tanner Lecture.
The B's silent now, apparently.
Borders in the Age of Networks. I won't repeat that he's a research professor at Witwatersrand. I'll just say I last introduced Achille to a Yale audience in
Achille,
2007. And in the decades since, he has published 3 major books. And I thought I'll start with those rather than going way back. The first, in 2010, was Sortie de la Grande Nuit, an allusion to Fanon's call to shake off the great mantle of night. Essay sur l'Afrique décolonisée, essay on decolonized Africa. Not yet translated into English, it opens with an extraordinarily powerful autobiographical narrative of a country and 3 cities. First, and please excuse my halting translations, I hope they're accurate. Born in the shadow of a country without a proper name, Cameroon, the name given by Portuguese seamen marveling at the abundance of shrimp, camaro, in the river. And born in the shadow of, and I quote, the first age of post-colonialism, its childhood and adolescence. And in the shadow of songs of lamentation for the disavowed martyrs of the anti-colonial struggle, and the schoolroom anthems of the post-colonial nation and potentate. Then, as with intellectuals, and I quote, since the time of Fanon, Césaire, and Senghor, having taken his master's at the University of Yaoundé, he left for Paris, where he took his doctorate at the Sorbonne, and New York, where he taught at Columbia, and where I won't summarize his luminous pages on what those 2 cities meant to him. He became a historian not only of the resistance in Cameroon, editing a collection of the writings of the martyred Reuben
So it's going to go on for a little bit. Why don't we jump ahead? Yeah, about 3 minutes. Yeah, let's get to Mbembe. That is a red suit. That is a very red suit.
I would like to thank Gary and the university for a very gracious invitation. As Gary said, we were both colleagues many years ago. He said 25 years, and I suddenly realized that time has been passing rather quickly, but as you can testify, Gary always looks very young, both physically and in his mind. Gary was and has been all along. His work has been a great inspiration for a lot of us. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Michael. I like Michael very, very much. I know he likes me too, as you could see with his introduction. And I'm very glad my wife, Sarah Nuttall, is here. Perhaps more than any other, ours is an epoch of fantasies. One such fantasy is that of total security or perfectly controlled or tightened borders, the dream of impenetrable and insurmountable limits, which is the same thing as the dream of a domain without an outside, a domain whose walls cannot be broken through, and whose boundaries can never be crossed,
Which sounds like hell from Paradise Lost, is immediately what comes to mind.
if only because they are continuously redrawn, displaced, and pushed back. So as the twin logics of order and security on the one hand, and freedom and movement on the other, confront one another, borders almost everywhere are increasingly found in unexpected places. In the not so distant past, borders have always been generative of new modes of power and a new political reason. Such was the case in 1884-1885, when, meeting in Berlin for what was then known as the Congo Conference, 14 European powers divided Africa among them for the purpose of colonization. This they did by carving out the entire continent and by superimposing on pre-existing political entities and cultures a hodgepodge of geometric boundaries that divided it into 50 aberrant countries. As clearly pointed out in the General Act of the Conference, this was all, a quote, in the name of free trade and civilization. As Article 2 of that General Act of the Conference specifies, a quote again, all flags, without distinction of nationality, shall have free access to the whole of the coastline of the territories above enumerated in Article 1, to the rivers there running into the sea, to all the waters of the Congo and its effluents, including the lakes, and to all the ports situated on the banks of these waters, as well as to all the canals which may in future be constructed with intent to unite the watercourses or lakes within the entire area of the territories described in Article 1. End of quote. The said Article 1 starts with the following statement, a quote again, the trade of all nations shall enjoy complete freedom. Follows a geographical specification, which is at the same time a naming of a large boundary and the claiming of a huge chunk of territory called the Basin of the Congo. And so it goes. A new mode of power, a new political reason, but even more crucially, a claim made in relation to an assemblage of territories made of rivers, of mountains, ridges and watersheds, lakes, maritime zones, lines, parallels and latitudes, points of demarcation, and assemblage of territories power is seeking to take possession of. So at the beginning, or at least in our colonial experience, the raison d'être of the border is to attend to the problem of the distribution of the earth. How must the earth of land be distributed? To whom does the earth belong?
Here, hang on. I want to look at this quickly. So I think I found the paper to which he's referring. The act, I should say. Well, that's no good. Let's use this. There we go. General Act of the Conference of Berlin of the Plenipotentiaries of Great Britain, Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, etc., etc. Act 1. Who, being provided with full powers which have been found in good and due form, have successively discussed and adopted 1. A declaration relative to freedom of trade in the basin of the Congo, its embouchures. I think that's how you said that. Circumjacent regions with other provisions connected therewith. Declaration relative to the slave trade and the operations by sea or land which furnish slaves to that trade. Then here we go, Article 1. The trade of all nations shall enjoy complete freedom in all the regions forming the basin of the Congo and its outlets. Just read this. Okay, I just wanted to see that. I'll put that in the server later for people who are curious.
Who can lay what type of claim to what part of it? To whom should be allotted what share? Who determines its distribution or partition? In its colonial roots, geopolitics is about the multiple distributions of populations, not only human, on the body of the earth. It is about the modes of occupation and redistribution of the earth, and the manner in which these modes affect the vital forces of all kinds of beings, human and non-human. Yesterday, borders used to manifest themselves in two major ways. First, as tangible physical features, usually located at the edge of state territory, and second, as sites where discretionary sovereign decisions were made in relation to whether to permit or to exclude what, whom, and under what terms. Nowadays, they are ever more mobile, complex, differentiated, dispersed, and fractalized, just as they remain contested. As more and more people find themselves on the move, new laws, regulations, bureaucracies, and procedures are produced in a renewed attempt at controlling and regulating their movements through and across the borderscapes of our world, and in an effort at setting the terms under which foreign bodies might enter, reside, work, settle, and perhaps...
This is actually very apropos. The Israel issue that we've been talking for the last couple of days. One of the things that followed the 1967 war was the Security Council. A Security Council. What's the actual term for it? It's resolution. That's the word. My brain's not working. I'm very tired. There's a Security Council Resolution 242. And I'm actually going to read a section here from Rashid Khalidi again, because it's a very good summary that has everything in very close proximity. As in 1947, a new international legal formula harmful to the Palestinians came via the medium of a UN resolution. And as with the Balfour Declaration of 1917, the key document contains not a single mention of Palestine or Palestinians. By its omissions, Resolution 242 consecrated a crucial element of Israel's negationist narrative. Since there were no Palestinians, the only genuine issue was that the Arab states refused to recognize Israel and wielded a phantom Palestine problem as a pretext for this refusal. In the discursive battle over Palestine, which Zionism had dominated since 1897, UNSC 242 gave validity to this brilliant fabrication, delivering a powerful blow to the displaced and occupied Palestinians. Only 2 years later, in 1969, Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir famously proclaimed that, quote, there were no such thing as Palestinians. They did not exist, unquote, and that they had never existed. She took the negation characteristic of a settler colonial project to the highest possible level. The indigenous people were nothing but a lie. Perhaps most important, Resolution 242 effectively legitimated the 1949 armistice lines, since known as the 1967 borders or the Green Line, as Israel's de facto boundaries. And so as a consequence of legislating about displacement, you also formalize and in a sense, baptize the displacing events that put them into motion. Because now they are reconstituted as a mobile thing, as something else that doesn't have a place. Now they are a refugee problem, not a population that has its own dignity, rights, etc. This is what this brought to mind.
Perhaps integrate in countries other than their own. Migration policy, which is mostly about the control of human mobility, is once again seen as a key index of sovereignty in a world of flows, risks, and threats. Furthermore, border work, the work of instituting, enacting boundaries, understood mostly as powers highly uneven, imperfect, and yet incessant labor to contain mobility, border work is ever more incorporated into everyday ways of life. It is enhanced by numerous security schemes and technologies supposedly configured to operate objectively, schemes objectively, that is, without prejudice or discrimination. Such security technologies are enlisted in what is increasingly an automated calculation of threats, a key feature of our times. They are configured in such a way as to track and veil and sort that which is hidden, that which must be detected and inspected, that which is out of place or unauthorized, concealed identities, aberrant movements, categories of potential enemies, actual human bodies in this age of generalized suspicion. Indeed, this is also an epoch when the human body, or more precisely that body that is not mine, re-emerges as potentially dangerous and meshed as it is with various figures of threat and insecurity. Threat to cultural identity, threat to the welfare state, threat to public order, and even an existential threat to our way of life and our way of being.
This is 5 years old, so this is very interesting that it precedes, this lecture precedes COVID by 2 years.
According to the new old security rationale, although everybody is potentially dangerous until proven otherwise, some categories of bodies and persons
by 1 year, sorry,
carry almost by definition more risks than others. Even at their most vulnerable state, they fundamentally endanger our lives. As such, they
so like one thing he doesn't mention is disease. This is something that's been brought to the fore very recently.
Must be the object of renewed profiling, classification, and isolation, or even eliminated in line with a long history in modernity that ties together the targeting, quarantining, restriction, and even extermination of populations that have been marked as abnormal or have been profoundly dishonored. The obsession with the borders of the human body, in particular the borders of that body that is not mine, has in turn unleashed a renewed algorithmic production of its nude image by fully body scanners and its examination on screens at a time when security is equated with visibility and concealment with threat. What the body looks like, what its parts are, what are its shapes and forms, what objects is it concealing, and what others shouldn't it, These are questions the new matrix of threat and risk is forcing us to ask with urgency.
That's an interesting, to bring in Schmidt a little bit, that's an interesting juxtaposition with the notion of the site of sovereignty, which again, under conditions of modern statehood, is identified with its capacity to exert military strength and in a legitimate capacity. Sovereignty is also being the site of the secret, wherein security involves opaqueness. So it ceases to be about everything being guarded, about your movements, etc., being kept secret, about your inner workings being kept opaque, and security starts to become, and this is at a conceptual level more broadly, security starts to be the omnipresence of surveillance, and not, for example, the reverse. And this is something, interestingly enough, that, where have I hit it? James Scott goes into quite a bit. And you can find discussions similar to this going all the way back to Livy, but one of the things that Scott will talk about is that the security and the ability of cities, states, and villages, and so on and so forth, to withstand external incursions. If you are interested in this, Seeing Like a State is Fantastic by James Scott once again, is precisely due to its inscrutability. Its security is directly tied to the fact that it is not easily mapped, it is not easily legible to an outside power. Even at the agricultural level, there is survival advantage, sort of economically, for agricultural, for farmers and whatnot that grow things like tubers, like potatoes and root vegetables and whatnot. Why? Because a raiding party, whether this is like literal raiders or the taxman, can't easily see what your actual yield is because it's underground. So it's an interesting point that we've entered into a situation where the secure is identified with the legible and the clear, which you might consider to be like an actual point of vulnerability. A wall that you can see through is a wall that you can track the occupants within. And this like tying this again to what he's talking about before, the move towards attempting to create a political space that is an inside without an outside. The wall and the border as such ceases to be a thing that is itself defensive, and instead it becomes a part of the surveillance system facing inwards. It is the eye on the wall. It's not the wall defending Westeros from the White Walkers or whatever.
So over the last 15 years, a huge amount of empirical work has been done in relation to both borders and migration.
And in terms of, and when I say like the eye on the wall, I mean obviously literally in terms of cameras, but also in terms of function. So borders aren't so much defensive things because they aren't really defended. War takes place after the violation of the border. Borders are fundamentally filters where they can register they can watch and register who goes where, how many, and of course you can prevent like the movement of peoples and so on and so forth. But there will never be a war in which the borderline itself is what is defended as if it has any defensive value.
And it is not my intention to rehearse it here. The wealth of data already accumulated has helped sharpen our understanding of mobility and of borders, of capture, immobility, and flight.
Imran says, we build the wall to keep out the enemy, and the enemy is poverty. That's why we build the wall. That's, oh, what's his name? God damn it, I was about to say something funny. Agamben, there you go. It's very Agambenian of you.
It has also highlighted the extent to which various processes are unfolding simultaneously, the freeing of internal mobility for some, and the hardening of external boundaries for others, phenomena such as the re-specialization of state sovereignty, the securitization of migration.
Okay, that confused me a little bit. I don't know if he said re-specialization or re-spatialization. I'm assuming re-spatialization, and the subtitles got it wrong, because the re-specialization doesn't make sense. Sovereignty is not specialized.
The merging of criminal justice and...
Oh, is that Daedalus? Oh, I'm sorry. All of you blue names look the same to me.
Immigration policing, the extraterritorialization of certain practices related to migration management. These and other processes have been the object of extensive and careful descriptions. Drawing from this material, it seems to me it's now possible to rethink what is at stake when the biopolitics of mobility intersects with the geopolitics of our times, the kind of political reason that is produced at this intersection. In other words, what is it that contemporary migratory struggles tell us about the border regimes of our times and the apparatuses of control and capture of bodies, capture of motion, capture of speed, and ultimately capture of life itself in the current conjuncture? These are some of the questions I would like to examine during these lectures. I will be using at times interchangeably such terms as borders, migration, mobility, movement. These are obviously technical concepts. Borders are at the front line of present-day geopolitics. They are also the sites where sovereignty is the most subject to reanimation. To be sure, the long-established concept of territorial, physical, or political boundary of a state still has relevance in a world in which lines, enclaves, and compartments have not entirely disappeared. The lines that continue to separate us are still there, but boundaries or borders are no longer conceived merely as walls or fences. Even when they manifest themselves as tangible physical features located at the edge of state territory, they are increasingly understood as a contingent assemblage of social practices subject to change. They are increasingly understood as relational arrangements of bodies in spaces, and not only as containers. In fact, as argued by many, the discretionary sovereign decisions that are taken at borders are ultimately the result of various interactions between border guards, detection devices, sniffer dogs, humans, non-humans. Bordering actions or practices in that sense represent a provisional stabilization of various forces and devices, forces with competing understandings of threat, forces whose function is to enact or perform security in the face of cunning and supposedly merciless enemy others. So a border, in this sense, is the result of how mobility control regimes use difference to constitute different spatial practices. So the point I'm trying to make is that, as a matter of fact, there is no homogenizing border logic. There isn't. Difference and territoriality are always practiced in fractured and partial ways. At least that is one thing we draw from the voluminous amount of research I was referring to. This having been said and taken together, these terms, borders, mobility, movement, and so on, these terms all mean one thing. The multiple distributions of human populations on the body of the earth. That's how I understand these terms. They all refer to the same thing, the monitoring of the movements of the populations that circulate on the surface of the earth.
Which is the case if you have a transition from the border as a wall to a filter, because at that point you're not dealing again with the actual sort of encompassing of a discrete political unit. What you are actually doing is identifying sort of nodes of movement, or stasis, if you will, or capture, I guess is maybe a better word for it under these circumstances. But that's really interesting. So you have a transition away from the border as being a wall to a filter, which then changes its nature fundamentally, which is crucial, because if the border merely becomes a filter and doesn't actually correspond to the limits of power anymore, then the bordered state as such doesn't really exist.
Or that happened to settle somewhere for various reasons. But in my understanding, what is ultimately at stake in the current...
That's right, Imran. So you lose the sort of single-term understanding of sovereignty and of sort of like political distribution, like distribution of political space. Because now you're not talking about the border even as a single kind of thing. It's a series of practices relating to the movements of peoples, and so it becomes a distributional tool. I'm not sure if that's the correct word, but like what's sort of crucial here is that sovereignty itself conceptually is kind of lost in the equation, and yet this is an accurate description, I think.
Planetary politics of mobility is the drawing of the new limits of the earth. In this context, the main function of borders is precisely to push outside, to throw outside that body that is not mine, or to put it in Heidegger's terms, the wrong people with the wrong blood. That's Heidegger's expression. In this sense, the border has the status of law. To be sure, border does not only exclude or separate, it can also connect, but overall, a border is, in the last instance, always...
That's an interesting juxtaposition, too. The border has the status of law. The term that we use to describe, that we translate from the Greek into law, also describes the internal organizing structure, nomos, of a political unit. And so if the delineating structure is diversified and its original function lost, and it starts to concern no longer the limits of sovereignty but the movements of populations, as Achille is arguing, then the political has also itself as a category been lost in the mess too, certainly as it's been classically conceived.
Is conceived in its disjunctive use. It always refers, in the last instance, to those populations coming from the outside, and in relation to which it must act as a filter, or which it actually threatens.
God, I love it when that happens. I've actually never heard this guy speak before. I didn't know he used the same language as filter. That's an analogy I came up with by myself. So that's very gratifying. It's fun when that happens.
So I start from the assumption that...
Also, I can now be sued for plagiarism. Brilliant.
Any form of mobility finds its limit at the border. The border is that which interrupts movement or motion. And in modernity, border control has played two decisive functions. It has been a key device in the planetary management of populations, it has also been a key vector for the configuration of various degrees of subjecthood, flow and distribution of bodies, the constitution of subjects without rights, and a preeminent site for the execution of state violence. The limit where life matters the most. So, the question...
And also, simultaneously, where life matters the most, also the quintessential point between friend and enemy. Man, this is so good. I'm going to have to read Necropolitics now. I'll have to order that.
Questions I'm asking are the following. To what new existences do borders bear witness in our contemporary world? Why,
what year is this from? This is from 2018, Brooks.
in the confrontation with borders, why do so many people, why are they compelled towards experimenting at the limits of the livable? This way of framing the issue is markedly different from the three approaches that have of late dominated debates on mobility in the age of borders and networks. Of the various strands that have of late dominated such debates, three in particular should be highlighted. A first strand, centered around the concept of precarity or precarious lives, has sought to delineate the interconnections between neoliberal work and welfare regimes, immigration controls, and the exploitation or hyper-exploitation of international migrant labor. Today, indeed more than at any other moment of our recent history, migrants are centrally implicated in highly precarious work experiences at the bottom end of labor markets, not only in Western capitalist countries, but also in various parts of the global South, as the case in South Africa, as the case in Gulf countries, and so forth and so on. The concept of precarity has been mobilized in an effort to describe those life worlds epitomized by migrant existence, an existence that is inflected with uncertainty and instability. It is a concept that has been understood both as a descriptor and as a condition. Condition, let me repeat, which itself is a consequence of neoliberal globalization and related transformations in the world of work. And precarity, in this instance, has been used as a key explanatory framework for new forms of workplace exploitation. The idea that the life of the migrant at the bottom end of the labor ladder is the metaphor of precarious life, this idea refers to something more than a position in the labor market. Precarity has also been understood as something intertwined with other areas of life, something almost existential, which speaks to the inability to predict one's fate, or to enjoy the degree of stability on which to build social relations and feelings of affection. Precarity has finally been understood as a condition of structural insecurity, as a consequence of differential exposure to violence and suffering that emanates from socio-political context. That's the first.
Yeah, that's true, Imran. The stadium for the last World Cup was built by this precarious migrant labor. Similarly, China relies upon huge populations of migrant labor internally to do a massive to do a lot of its building works. This migrant labor is not simply that which is shunned; it is also that which is relied upon as an economic force.
Way in which the question of mobility...
You can extend it further. Hong Kong historically relies upon migrant labor. even at the domestic level, things like house cleaners, so on and so forth. When you have people working as long as they are, this is why you have rampant abuse of like nannies and whatnot, especially in middle class Hong Kong households, because they're required, but they're also squeezed enough that it's a mess.
Borders, migrancy has been dealt with through the lens of this concept of precarity. A second strand of debates on migration has focused on emerging geographies of detention, imprisonment, and confinement. In other words, the carceral landscapes of our world. The idea here is that a migrant, a body on the move in a way that is not authorized, is almost by definition likely to end up in one form or another of a prison. To be detained, confined, deported is part of the options he or she permanently faces. The driving concept in this case has been that of categorical vulnerability. Indeed, during 2009 alone in the US, approximately 380,000 people spent time in the vast and continuously expanding migrant detention system. According to Detention Watch Network, this system consisted then of approximately 350 facilities operating at an annual cost of more than 1.7 billion US dollars. In other countries such as the UK, the use of migrant detention in the form of asylum screening units has expanded. Across the European Union, detention facilities have similarly proliferated and now number in the hundreds, while Australia has intensified detention.
This is interesting. So it sounds like this discourse places the stopgaps of movement at the feet of carceral institutions, sort of necessarily. A migrant movement is going to be, immobilized. That's how it ceases to be, right? That's how it is controlled. And this can be at the level of the criminalization of certain types of migration that is unregistered or unattached to a specific state identity, or alternatively, it can mean diversion into refugee camps, sometimes for decades at a time. Once again, apropos the Palestinian question, or it can involve directing into cordoned off slums, Gaza.
Practices on and offshore. In short, the world has witnessed a significant expansion of landscapes of detention over the last decade. So has been the growth of detention structures along transnational routes traveled by migrants in their journeys through Northern Africa, Eastern Europe, Indonesia, and Central America. Simultaneously, detention and deportation have become more than ever interlocked industries. In this context, an important strand of studies on borders and mobility has been preoccupied with the extent to which the categorical vulnerability to which migrants and undocumented people are subjected, to what extent is this category legally produced. Then there is a third strand, which has focused on the warehousing of refugees and asylum seekers. Here too, the number of people in the world fleeing conditions of war, violence, disasters, economic distress, and environmental collapse has been swelling. In 2014, the number of forcibly displaced people in the world surpassed the record number of people displaced in the aftermath of the Second World War. I think the latest figures we have had last year flag, we are told that there are 65 million people, 65 million refugees in search of asylum in our world as we speak. So from whatever angle one examines it, the border, therefore, remains a biopolitical space. And in a number of instances, border crossing has become a matter of life and death. In such a context, humanitarian border work's goal is not to abolish border controls or to contest the border as a space of exercise of sovereign power, but to turn it into a space both of rescue and of provision of basic emergency care. The rescaling and outsourcing of borders is not only happening inland, it is also happening offshore.
So critically, we very frequently will deploy a classical liberal notion of the justification for state sovereignty, namely that the sovereignty of a state is justified by protecting the interests of its subjects, and its subjects, by enjoying that protection, give tacit consent to that state institution's existence and functioning and so on and so forth, to its authority. However, that presumes a principle of free movement, because if you cannot choose to be protected or not, just as you lack the capacity to refuse, you also lack the capacity to consent, right? So one of the problems with this is that people will sort of, one of the side problems presented by this switch from borders as the limit of sovereign power to borders as the filter of the movement of populations of organisms, is that old justification doesn't work anymore, because you have lost the freedom to actually relocate. You can only relocate as a provision of sovereign power, which means that sovereignty is no longer justified by a reference to it supplying something to which a subject consents to receive in exchange for its rule, both the positive and the negative aspects of this. Sovereign power is solely the capacity for violence. It is solely the fact that the state is the apex predator as far as social organizations are concerned. And so you actually can't, you really are in a post-liberal world that way, because you can't rely on the old liberal justifications for state authority. Because remember, that's fundamentally what liberal political theory is. It's a justification of the form of the state that is inherited by people like Hobbes, by Locke, etc. And it's only by reinterpreting the justification of the state as is that the state itself becomes something radically different. Something else has quietly happened here, although perhaps it'd be more accurate to say it never really was that. This was a logic that was sort of overlaid upon the state in order to justify it out of a fear of whatever. Whether this is a opening of a door to giving people the right to revolt in the case of Locke, or whether it's closing the door and justifying the leaving well enough alone of a tyrannical and oppressive state authority on the eve of civil war, right?
Especially on deserts and islands, where high measures of enclosure aim at shutting down paths to asylum or at containing people trying to reach sovereign territories in ever smaller and more remote locations.
Yeah, just because you said that, Eudaimonia, I'm going to start using Barbie as an alternative to post-liberal. And so when I say a post-liberal world, I actually mean you're a Barbie girl living in a Barbie world. It's all plastic.
Locations. Such is notably the case with Europe's southern peripheries. In particular, the two Spanish enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla. In Melilla, following the arrival of the first group of African migrants, Spain built a 3-meter-high fence, 12 kilometers square, in Melilla, which is a 12-kilometer square enclave, which is located, in fact, in northeastern Morocco, which has been under Spanish sovereignty since the late 15th century.
Except, unlike Barbie, you can't touch his hair, because he has none.
A few years later, the EU financed the construction of a 6-meter-high, 3-tier fence equipped with manned control posts, infrared cameras, acoustic sensors, and motion detectors. The EU also put pressure on Morocco to control its side of the border. In response, Morocco initiated...
Libs erased the border? Not exactly. Libs didn't erase the border. Libs actually, they erected the border, first of all. But the changing of the nature of a border from the limits of sovereignty, understood as a more sort of homogeneous spatial principle, to the border as a filter, was affected by specifically liberal concerns, because there were contradictions at play. Namely, consent is something that you sort of have to verify, right? And then the question becomes, well, hang on, in the verifying of consent, aren't you sort of, at least at a superficial level or an immediate sense, aren't you contradicting the free action of your fellow subjects? And so this is the debate that took place when they wanted to implement literacy requirements for Indian subjects to go work in the colonies or things like that. Because India was under British rule, Indians were British subjects, and so they had the right of free movement throughout the empire. Except white British subjects didn't always like that, and so there was a clever misuse of a very serious problem, which is Indian laborers who were not literate, who couldn't read in English, they would be taken advantage of. And they would be given contracts, they would sign contracts they didn't understand that were disadvantageous to them. But, by the same token, that fear of, or that ambiguity, are these adult laborers who are signing contracts, do they know what they're signing? Are they being taken advantage of? That was used in order to impose a registration condition on free movement throughout the empire. And so you have the invention of the border checkpoint. You have people having to show documentation that they are rightfully there in accordance with, that has been confirmed that they are able to move in that way. And that transforms over time to, do you have a right to be there? Are you allowed? Are you someone who has been granted access to this filter, through this filter?
Regular military cleanup operations, most of which consisted in putting migrants in trucks, taking them to the city of Oujda, further down south, near the border with Algeria, and dumping them there, or in the desert. A key component of the strategy of outsourcing, European border control has expanded outwardly with the assistance of third countries, at the same time as internal border control is strengthened through surveillance agencies, increased rates of deportation, and the proliferation of internment.
Exactly. Liberals made the borders worse. But they didn't just make them worse, they also made them better first. Because when you have, like, liberal philosophy is not bad. It's a genuine development and improvement on state theories and sort of state conceptions that came before. But now that is the status quo, and that's played out. Or it's not really the status quo, but that discourse is the status quo. And it's played itself out to a point where the contradictions are becoming manifest, and you have to move beyond it. You don't get Marxism or things like that without liberalism. That's sort of a condition of that line of analysis even really being thinkable. At least certainly that's been the history. Maybe there are other ways to get somewhere similar, but that's how we did. But the nature of progress is that once you reach a point, you continue to move past it, and that point that you once reached, like there was a time when Aquinas's separation of natural and divine law was an innovation. That was a move that opened up the door for new philosophical horizons. To continue to refer to natural and divine law is revolutionary no longer.
Centers. As far as outsourcing is concerned,
Eudaimonia, you'll like this. Progress is limit phobic. There you go. This is important. The border will expand out to nations adjoining, so Italy's border enforcement will expand out to Algeria, Spain, to Morocco, and so on, yeah? Yeah.
Moroccan government has been building its own...
In fact, try this on for size. One of the pretexts for violating the sovereignty of its neighboring states, of Israel's neighboring states, was terror and criminal incursions by groups that were refugees kicked out by Israel. How's that?
Barbed wire fence, a fence partially financed by the EU subsidies allocated to Spain for border control. The same thing is happening as we speak throughout the Sahara Desert, in places such as Niger, Libya, of course, Burkina Faso, and along the coast of Senegal. Typical of the distinctly neoliberal articulation between securitization and free market internationalism, the same countries that are determined to secure their borders are actively engaged in the construction of free trade partnerships with the very same neighbors from whom they seek to protect themselves, which raises, of course, the question of selective permeability. In other words, of whose interest the opening or closing of border serves. I could go on and on the case of these two enclaves and the islands, or talk...
Progress is not phobic of limits. The conditions desire to enjoy the limitations given through what potentials are allowed due to territorialities of thought. But that conditioning doesn't stop, right? So you're right, I agree. It is limited, it's directional, it has an orientation, there are lines. I mean, it's like even progress by itself is not just a mere spiraling out into chaos. It's like an actual development, which implies like some kind of linear directionality, which implies limits. There are things that count as progress and things that don't. But it is limit phobic in the sense that it contemns limits that are reached as like benchmarks, because they become limits, don't they? When you like this is one of the typical it's the Jeopardy thesis that Albert Hirschman talks about. You will lose all that you have gained. You are risking all of these hard-won achievements by pushing too hard, right? So I mean, yeah. So I agree with you, Brooks. But in another sense, it also is. I think it's both.
More about the desert, but the point I really want to make is that the three strands I have evoked all point towards one thing. They point towards the fact that a reworking and rescaling of borders is in the making. And it is in the making at a planetary level, globally. It is in the making as a result of the emergence of a new mobility regime, one which is planetary in scale. And I would now like to say a few words about this new mobility regime. I have gone to some length describing the ways in which islands enter into this new calculus of mobility. I also alluded to the extent to which deserts are implicated in the same process. I would now like to focus on what we should more broadly call the liquid frontier.
Ooh, I like that term. Oh, I like that term so much.
Because the liquid frontier is at the avant-garde of the redefinition of sovereignty in the contemporary world.
Yes.
In order to understand the liquid frontier
We
and
must
how
become
it
liquid
reorganizes
ourselves.
sovereignty and contributes to the making of a new global mobility regime, an excursion through Carl Schmitt's Nomos of the Earth
Yes!
is necessary, if only because for Schmitt, the fundamental distinction on which geopolitics has been predicated, geopolitics in the sense of the distribution of the earth, a redistribution of the earth, which are equated with mobility and borders at the beginning, even because for him, geopolitics has been predicated on a binary division between a solid land where territories can be clearly demarcated and where order may be imposed, and the sea. So the land on the one hand, the sea on the other, where borders, according to Schmitt, in any case, can be neither traced nor held, and where in Schmittian imaginary, freedom reigns absolute. That's how he understands, let's say, the sea.
So this is Nomos of the Earth. Here, let's make this bigger. You probably can't read it anyways, but it's the principle of the thing. This is the Nomos of the Earth, and we are looking for page 172. The freedom of the sea. In the perspective of the Jus Publicum Europaeum, all land on the earth belonged either to European states or to those of equal standing, or it was land free to be occupied, i.e. potential state territory or potential colonies. In the 19th century, special forms of European extraterritoriality and consular jurisdiction were developed for half-civilized or exotic countries. The sea remained outside any specific state spatial order. It was neither state, nor colonial territory, nor occupiable space. It was free of any type of state spatial sovereignty. The firm land was divided by clear linear borders into territorial states or areas under state domination. The sea had no borders other than coasts. It was the only territorial surface free of all states and open for trade, fishing, and the free pursuit of maritime wars and prize law, without regard to proximity or geographical borders. Thus, land and sea were divided into two separate and distinct global orders within the Eurocentric world order that arose in the 16th century. For the first time in human history, the antithesis of land and sea became the universal foundation of a global international law. No longer was one concerned with such maritime areas as the Mediterranean, the Adriatic, or the Baltic Seas, but now with the entire globe, including the oceans. This completely new antithesis of land and sea determined the big picture of a Jus Publicum Europaeum that sought to give its nomos to a world Europe had discovered geographically and had measured scientifically. Thus, two universal and global orders confronted each other without being able to assume the relation between universal and particular law. Each was universal in its own right. Each had its own concepts of enemy, war, booty, and freedom. The total decision for international law in the 16th and 17th centuries culminated in a balance of land and sea, and the opposition of two orders that determined the nomos of the earth precisely in their mutual tension. I almost want to keep going. I'll do the next paragraph. This connecting link between the different orders of land and sea became the island of England, This explains England's unique position vis-à-vis this European international law. England alone took the step from a medieval feudal and terrestrial existence to a purely maritime existence that balanced the whole terrestrial world. Spain was too terrestrial, and despite its overseas empire, unable to remain a sea power. France became a quote-unquote state in the classical sense of the word, and opted for the specific territorial spatial form of sovereign statehood. Holland became landbound after the Treaty of Utrecht. But England, unlike its rivals, was not so deeply involved in the politics and wars of the European continent. England, as John Robert Seeley said, was, quote, the least hampered by the old world, unquote. England thus completed its transition to the maritime side of the world and determined the nomos of the earth from the sea. I just wanted to read that. We'll press on.
Of course, this is an idealization of the sea. The sea as an empty, almost abstract and frictionless.
Can anyone read that text? No, nobody can read the text. This is art, Brooks. This is not about legibility. This is about the thing as a numinous presence on the screen. I'm going to upgrade the camera soon so you can see it.
Geometric space open to navigation. Question of navigation, which we found too when I was referring to the carving of Africa during the Berlin conference. So this idealization, of course, it has been critiqued. In fact, as we now realize, oceans hardly cover space evenly. Oceans are, in fact, a fabric.
Just make the text bigger. Doesn't work. Just trust me, okay? It doesn't work.
Full of holes. It is stitched together out of pieces. The sea is, if you want, a tangle of strings. That we know now. Schmidt might not have known about this, but at least now we have the advantage of knowing better than he did. But the liquid territory of the sea nevertheless offers a number of particularities. First, because water covers over 70% of the surface area of our planet, many frontiers in the world today are located in the sea. That's the first point. Second, the sea is what we can get in terms of the idea of an absolute boundary. All boundaries are relative. But if we were to imagine, if only for a second, what an absolute boundary might look like, we have to look not on land, but on the sea. It is the only absolute boundary because it alone blocks the continuous expansion of a people. It alone. Deleuze and Guattari believe that the desert does that better than the sea. But these are discussions we can explore later. So the sea does that, and yet it can be domesticated to bring people into contact. It enables circulation while adding friction to movement, while adding friction to life. The other interesting thing with the sea, I lay down all of this and then I will draw the conclusion at the end and you'll see where I'm going. The third interesting thing with the sea, according to Schmidt, is that, of course, it is stirred by currents and waves, and by being stirred by currents and waves, it seems to erase any trace, including traces of the past, or to relegate.
This is pure Schmidt, by the way.
Contain them at its very bottom. And because of this apparent permanent erasure of all traces, the sea seems to maintain everything in a kind of permanent present, according to Schmidt.
Okay, sorry, he's still reading Schmidt. Gotcha.
Furthermore, still with Schmidt, part of what characterizes this vast expanse is the lack of stable habitation on its surface. I mean, this was probably before
Rapture.
the oil digging,
There you go.
oil extraction,
He's talking about oil rigs.
which today allows for, inhabitations on the surface, but okay, we are not yet there with Schmidt.
Well, I think crucial, it's not that it allows for habitations on the surface, that there was the motive to create habitations on the surface. Like there were sea powers that identified purely as sea powers, long in advance of England and long in advance of oil rigs and sea land and so on and so forth. Namely, Athens during the Peloponnesian War sort of re-identify it as an island because its trade routes and its imperial holdings didn't actually require holding onto the city to maintain. And so the purpose of the long walls was that in the event of a Spartan invasion of a superior force, they would abandon Athens proper, run to the Piraeus port city, and they would defend the wall of the port clearly, but they would primarily take to the ships. Why? Because they can live forever if they have the ocean. And so they are a de facto island.
He's still writing at a time when this doesn't seem at all possible. And because of this lack of stable habitation,
But I mean, technically, we've been able to inhabit like water spaces for a long time, and we've made artificial islands. Tenochtitlan is an artificial island.
I quote him, events at sea occur mostly outside of the public gaze and thus remain unaccounted for. This lack of accountability as a characteristic feature of what happens at sea. Even more importantly, throughout modernity...
It had a core of an island, but then was extended off like considerably, so that would be like a marker on water.
Maritime governance...
What's going on here? That was weird. Okay, it just hiccuped randomly for some reason. YouTube's been so weird lately.
Hugo Grotius wrote about in his Shinonan text, Mare Liberium. Whatever the case, Schmidt was wrong. He wasn't wrong. He got stuck. Let's put it like that. With his distinction, with his land-sea binary.
Oh, okay, we're getting into good stuff. We have a Schmidt critique coming up. This is going to be good.
What has happened of late is that the new modes of regulation of human mobility have tried to go beyond this land-sea binary by being attuned more than ever before to the vertical dimensions of maritime spaces. And in so doing, we are nowadays able to decipher a much more complex form of governance than the simple opposition between territorial control and deterritorialized flows. What I mean by this is that in the new regimes of mobility, many have come to the realization that, in fact,
that the state is now itself the sea. Hark!
Territorial control can go hand in hand with deterritorialized flows.
Oh, it was right. There you go.
What we have today, therefore, is a far more complex jurisdictional regime and mode of governance in which the rights and obligations that compose modern state sovereignty on the land are decoupled from each other and applied to varying degrees depending on the spatial extent and the specific issue in question. This is what Saskia Sassen calls unbundled sovereignty.
And
And
bundled?
this partial sovereignty regime
And bundled sovereignty.
intersect with ever-shifting lines of control in which routes and traffic have become key. What does it mean? It means that in the making of the new regime of mobility, motion has been put at the center. And if you want to control the migration of people, what you have to follow as carefully as possible and trace is the movement of people along routes and intersections along their journeys. So sovereignty and governance attempt now to be exercised on routes and traffic, to follow those routes, to police them, while policing in the same way high seas are policed. So, sovereignty in this case has to do with the negotiation of the inextricable articulation between freedom and control, which is characteristic indeed of forms of mobility governance in neoliberal societies. And these sets of lines do not simply coexist. In fact, the carving up of partial sovereignty regimes is the very basis for governance in motion. I have used the sea to show the extent to which it has become a laboratory in which contemporary modes of mobility control have been devised and experimented with, which are now being brought to bear on the land. So what used to be done exclusively at sea is now done on land. On the land, as at sea, border functions on the land have been decoupled from the limits of the territorial border and are becoming increasingly dispersed and mobile, able to follow ever-shifting routes. That's what is the kernel of the new mobility regime. Now, one of the most significant transformations in terms of the geopolitics of mobility is without doubt the blurring of inside-outside and the extent to which borders have been externalized and the border has become a transnational assemblage.
Love that word.
A number of authors speak in this regard about the emergence of a territorially extended, increasingly informal and itinerant bordering assemblage of institutions, state authorities, policies that react to dynamic and turbulent migratory movements.
Imran says, there's the policing of routes and seas as opposed to merely sealing themselves at a single geographical point of demarcation. The crucial point is that think of it this way. The border as a filter is fundamentally not a border in the classical sense because they are fundamentally connecting nodes that establish routes of movement, right? And so I guess the shape of sovereignty has now taken on the nature of those, sovereignty has taken on the shape, rather, of those movements. And so there is still a tendency to kind of privilege the line of which the territorial border is comprised, but sovereignty itself doesn't follow the line. Sovereignty follows the movement. Does that make sense? And so in that way, and given the shifting nature of these movements, the fact they trespass by their nature sovereign lines and things of that sort, there has come into place a tendency of the actual shape of territorial sovereignty or the actual shape of sovereignty more generally, to have kind of a more protean form, where it's now following, it's now like it is following the flows of things, and it no longer corresponds to a single place. Does that make sense? I think I could be misunderstanding him, of course. Like that's how I would sort of try to get at the essence of what he's getting at. But seas demarcate clearly the traditional border while allowing permeability of capital on its surface. Deserts have no demarcation; they are purely smooth place. Borders are meaningless there. Well, that's not true. Even deserts, first of all, deserts are geographical limits themselves, or they are filled with them. They can have mountains, they can have ravines, they can have arid and less arid spots and stuff like that. They can have ruins, right? I mean, I think the difference is that water demarcates the traditional border because traditionally states want to border water because you need water to live. You don't need deserts to live. Deserts do have a demarcation. They're not purely smooth.
At the same time, the outsourcing, offshoring, and extraterritorialization of border work has led to a spatial and legal stretching of the domains of migration control and a redefinition of the jurisdictions and authorities traditionally associated with border management. We see it in places such as Senegal, Mauritania, Niger, Burkina Faso, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, where the shifting performance of sovereignty entails the ability for the security forces of European countries to act in tandem with forces of these third states in an attempt at cutting off the routes of migration. Of course, all of this raises all kinds of dilemmas, these forms of mobile sovereignty. The legal and institutional foundations for such programs remains unclear, particularly with the near permanent basing of operational border control and policing. Foreign forces are involved in other states. Now, let me move on and come back to the question of the body with which I started. I indicated that the rescaling of borders has entailed a global expansion of security infrastructure, ranging from physical and virtual walls to the deployment of drones and military hardware to monitor and secure space. I argued that a novel migration regime is emerging.
Oh, I see what you're saying. There's no line where a desert starts. Okay. Yeah. No. I see what you're saying, Brooks. I get what you mean there. Yeah. So like water conforms to a linear border better. That makes okay. Yeah. Now we're on the same page.
Which requires, as I tried to show through the reference to the sea, which requires a non-linear understanding of territory. I also argued that the inside can now be outside, the sea on land, and the land on sea. And what we used to take as close can be far away, and vice versa. All of this geometry is fast changing, and it's changing as a consequence. The old models of sovereignty understood at an earlier period as control over people, taxes, and discrete territories. What I would like to add now has to do with the extent to which, in a world of technology-enabled flows, sovereignty over discrete territories has become, almost by definition, incomplete. Many governments, especially in the North, have understood that in order to govern the movement of people across borders, it is absolutely crucial to first classify them. Today, one of the most efficient ways to achieve such a goal is through the harvesting and strategic use of electronic personal data. The purpose of classification is to bring back bodies into a zone of calculation and manageability. This is the reason why in the new regime of human mobility I'm referring to, bordering practices have become digitized through the automation of data collection and data analysis. So what is being collected? Genetic information. It is stored in electronic form in searchable bases, physiological features unique to individuals, such as fingerprints, patterns of the iris, the retina, the veins of the hand, physiognomic features such as voice patterns are transformed via algorithms to produce so-called templates. These templates in turn are stored in centralized databases that are accessed whenever necessary. And templates are, when they are not stored centrally, they are put on a chip, inserted into all kinds of documents, such as passports and identity cards.
And skin, increasingly.
So in this context, to classify consists in converging the data from integrated bases with biometric identifiers, such as those I have mentioned. And classification, in this instance, relies obviously on a series of dividing practices in which the subject is broken up into calculable risk factors. In other words, to classify, which is a very old exercise, but to classify today is to categorize populations into degrees of riskiness, and classification mostly has to do with a preemptive fixing of identities. So, thanks to the biometric turn, governments are embedding their regulatory functions in various networks of global flows with the help of digital technologies, so that sovereignty, prerogatives, can travel with the flows.
Yes.
So to old model based on the actual physical control of discrete territories, they are grafting a new model of mobile and flowing sovereignty. In this new model, linear border functions are dislocated and pushed both outward into, as I said, other states' territories, and inward into national societies. Now, this new border regime, moving towards the end now, has produced several significant spatial outcomes. Borders have become more mobile, but more importantly, borders have become portable. Thus, opening the entire space of the globe.
And I think crucially as well, he didn't necessarily say this super clearly, but the border as the line, because when he's talking about like the move away from a linear border, we still tend to think of borders as borders. Maybe border isn't even the word for it anymore, because we're not really talking about a border anymore. Because the border used to function as essentially the skin of a sovereign power. What's actually happened is sovereign powers no longer have skin. They're like nervous systems. And so what's happened is the border as such has transformed into that which actually corresponded with the defensive posture against the outside to those nodes which direct and sort of structure the shape of movements. And these don't take on the shape of a skin. There is still that abstract skin that's sort of implied by the notion of a filter itself, but it's not a true filter in that respect. It engages in a filtering activity, but it engages in a filtering activity at points.
Two potential bordering processes. What I mean by that is that borders have no limits. They are no longer limits to bordering processes.
Which, as essentially nervous systems, we've affected the inside without the outside. There is no longer an externality to state authority. We are inside the body, as it were. That's sort of where the logic takes you.
There has been an increase in bordering instances.
A really good book, by the way, on how you still nonetheless retain the imaginary of borders. Give Sarah Ahmed's The Cultural Politics of Emotion a look. Absolutely fantastic. Cannot recommend this enough. In particular, the contingency of pain. I've actually offered that as a theory option before. I will probably offer it again. Excellent chapter.
As people can now encounter borders in various forms in a multitude of locales within their daily lives. The nature of an individual's encounter with borders has also changed, since this is often mediated by diverse digital devices and managed more and more by private actors. So border control has become more individualized, more molecular, almost cellular, as digitization allows surveillance to zero in on the smaller spaces, such as the body, and continuously monitor the body. Now the question is the following: why is it that border security practices have taken such a keen interest in the connection between the human body and identity as a means of achieving detailed control of a movement? This is the case because the human body is seen as an indisputable anchor to which data can be safely secured. So as a result, we are witnessing a gradually extending intertwinement of individual physical characteristics with information systems, a process that has served to deepen faith in data as a means of risk management and faith in the body as a source of absolute identification. The idea is that the body remains the truth of the individual. If you want to know who you are, we better open your body. So
I'd rather not.
digital devices, the work they are doing is similar to a work of dissection.
How about this? Forget digital devices at remove from the body. There are increasingly the use of implants which monitor your health and convey that information back to your doctor. Think about that. The body itself as being the indisputable carrier of information. No, that's changing a little bit. That's changing a little bit. Yeah. So he's understating the point here quite a bit.
What is at stake in the extension of the biometric border into multiple realms of social life, in particular into the human body. The most efficient way to regulate mobile bodies is to turn them into portable borders. Let me conclude. The argument I wanted to make tonight was pretty straightforward. The function of the border, of any border, is to simultaneously divide and define, and in so doing, to generate new sets of relationships between the socio-spatial entities and the actual bodies they bring into existence.
Spatial, not special.
Borders do not simply enclose, they also provide an instrument to gain access to or bar access to unevenly geographically distributed resources. As I will show tomorrow, the tension between mobility and immobility is itself intrinsic to the workings of global capital. I was particularly interested in the question of the body at the border and the borders of the body, especially that body that is not mine. Most of the bodies in motion in our contemporary world, the multiplicity of bodies attempting to break through the wall, are engaged in an old struggle, the struggle to sustain life under catastrophic conditions. Rendered superfluous by the volatile forces and flows of capital, they are desperately trying to escape places that have been rendered uninhabitable. Catastrophic conditions should be defined as those under which each life and every breath suddenly acquires an utmost value, caught as they are in the nexus of vulnerability and emergency. What a body is and what a body might become find their limit precisely at that border of vulnerability and emergency. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, that was so good. Some of you guys wanted Peterson tonight. Have you no shame? Alright, here's what we're going to do. My voice is gone. What I'm probably going to do, or it's definitely going, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to end stream. I'm probably going to open up stream again tonight later, and we're going to do the last segment. Or we'll do that tomorrow. Either or. But I'm going to send you off now. Thank you everybody who fed the Theory Squid tonight and got us this. I am extremely grateful we got to go through this tonight. This was fantastic. I'm going to figure out where I'm sending you now. Who's up? Is Riverboat Jack going? No. How about... I wonder if Sinclair Lore. No. Demon Mama? Okay, someone give me suggestions. Where do you want me to send you? Who's live? Must be someone. There's always someone. I guess nobody. I guess I'll see you back here in a little bit. Have a good night if I don't see you. Otherwise, cheerio.